This is new for me. I got it for as a Christmas present. I'll give it a shot. This actually kind of worked out. And it doesn't have access to like the whole internet, so I have to stay focused, which I think is the most important part.
Madam Clerk?
Right.
Welcome. We're now at our regular business meeting. I apologize for being a little late. We had some matters in closed session to discuss. Is there a motion to certify the closed meeting?
Sure. I move that this council certify by a recorded vote that to the best of each councilor's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, please vote. Okay, motion passes 5-0. We'll begin the business meeting with a moment of silence. Thank you. Councilors, are there any announcements?
Yes, I have one.
Thank you.
There is a Yes You Matter campaign kickoff. The acronym is YUM on February 12th, next Monday at 10:30 a.m. at the Jefferson School Foundation. The initiative was created in 2018 by Mr. Alexander, and it focuses on, it's a proactive, positive way to encourage everyone that they matter regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, religion. Local, state, and national officials have declared that we are experiencing a mental health crisis and a need to confront people's depression and anxiety. So this is a You Matter campaign to counteract that. There will be posters distributed in memoriam of Jackson Lightfoot Whitsett, who passed away in 2023 after facing mental health challenges. There will be a National Suicide Crisis Prevention Hotline advocacy, and other local mental health services represented. Kickoff is open to the public. The Jefferson School is located at 233 4th Street Northwest.
Thank you, Alexander. He does good things in the community. So thank you for making that an announcement, Natalie. Are there other announcements? If not, do we have any recognitions this month, Madam Clerk?
We didn't have any proclamations, but if you all have anything to recognize.
Okay. If not, Ms. Thomas, can you please read the consent agenda?
Were we going to move, the agenda as we've got it has community matters after the consent agenda has been voted on, which I know we had talked in our retreat about eliminating or about consolidating two of the community matters provisions. But I think what we need to do is to have this community matters before we get to, well, actually, we can have the reading of the consent agenda, but just not the voting on the consent agenda.
Right, and so as part of it, we open up the hearing for people to speak on the consent agenda item, and then we vote on it.
Okay. The point is that the agenda is sort of incomplete in that respect. It's a little different from the way it has been in previous meetings. It used to be that the agenda would specifically recite 3 different community matters times.
Right.
This one only recites 2, but will we still be having community matters comments on the consent agenda?
Yes. Yes, it's here.
Right, it's just consent agenda comment as part of the consent agenda.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not been called out separately on past agendas. It's been offered as part of the mayor's script.
Yeah.
And if I could, just to clarify, In the retreat, the discussion was about reorganizing. The city attorney still has to reconcile all those various comments and bring that back, so we did not opt to make any changes based on the discussion until you have a chance to look at what he comes back as the proposed, adoption or recommendation of all your items.
Okay.
So consent agenda, number 4, minutes, September 18th meeting, October 25th meeting, and December 4th meeting. Number 5, resolution to appropriate opioid abatement funding dollars, one of 2 readings. And we have a new number 6 is the resolution to appropriate ARPA funding and authorize the city manager to acquire Avon Levy property for future development, $4,181,000, second reading.
Thank you. We'll now take public comment regarding the consent agenda items that were just read by the clerk. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. Is there anyone would like to speak on the items just listed on the consent agenda?
Hi, I'm Alex O'Mai. I'm a Belmont resident, and I'd like to talk about the purchase of the Avon Levy
Yes.
property. So I have sort of 3 points that I want to make. One is evaluate the site. So as you know, it was previously a gas station for many years. There was a petrol leak there, and there was a remediation done. After the remediation, there was leaking found in the monitoring wells, so petroleum was found there. And so in speaking with the folks who run the tank program at the Department of Environment at the Virginia, they said that below-grade issues might be present. So in terms of fully understanding what you're getting into, I think it's important to evaluate the environmental issues associated with the site. Number 2, engage, which is really engagement of Belmont residents and city residents in general. City residents weren't consulted as it relates to site selection for the proposed shelter. I know that other items have been discussed for use of this property, but homeless shelter is always mentioned as part of those items and seems to be a priority for the city council. So I think engagement of the residents is critical to do as part of this effort, both in site selection and in future planning. And the other thing really is about planning. If you're going to offer homeless beds, you really need to have a suite of services that are adequately supported and adequately funded to address the complex issues of the unhoused population, including mental health, of course, healthcare, and other wraparound services. So I think budget should be considered and evaluated for support of those services, because if you don't provide the full suite of services, then problems with the residents become, city problems, basically. We want to make sure that they're adequately addressed. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And as the next person comes up, I just want to make it clear for this particular item, it is a real estate transaction. There's been no determination at this point to be what's going to be done with it. I know what's out there. I was able to speak to some residents on Friday to explain this. When that time comes up, we're doing a comprehensive study, to answer some of those questions. What does this community need? What is the real need of a number of beds that's needed? We don't know that yet, and once we have that information, we would then work with the community, our partners, to determine what that will look like. We are just purchasing the property now. No determination has been made to what to do with that. And we will have a really robust, and I got some good ideas on what that should look like by talking to some residents on Friday that I'll be sharing with the city manager. But we want to hear this, but there will be definitely down the road when that time comes. And after looking at our budget forecast, it's going to be a while before that money is available. But we'll be engaging with our community partners, our hopefully adjacent localities, and definitely the public on what that will look like. But I'm sorry, ma'am, please proceed.
Hello, Linda Sprinkle, also from Belmont. I was wondering, is there any way to turn up the amplification on you all? I'm having a very hard time hearing. Do your mics turn up at all?
We'll ask them to do it. They're hearing, so
Okay.
thank you.
Well, the main thing is being an elderly, single woman in the Belmont area on Avon Street, my first worries are about safety. I normally walk my dog through that area, and I've also had experience with some of our unfortunate residents that are not in good health mentally that come on and knock on the door and, want to work, want to do things, but they're not in good shape, so that's alarming to me. The other thing is, I was wondering if the $4 million could not be put towards Friendship Circle, or is that a completely different thing? I know they're waiting to start phases 2 and 3. Also, when that was all initiated, a couple of neighbors and I were concerned about the parking issues in the areas, and I also want to just echo what Alex said about being informed more than 2 weeks beforehand and knowing what is going to come to the community, because we already have Friendship Square there. We have already got cars parking any which way in the middle of 6th going through there, and I don't see any routine police driving through to correct. And of course, with cars parking there, I'm worried about drug sales going on, although I haven't issued anything. So the overall issue of safety for our area, for those of us who have tried to be good citizens in that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a quick point for this portion, for Community Matters. We appreciate everyone who's here to speak, but how it typically works is you'll raise your hand and then the mayor will call on you.
Great. Good evening. My name is Rebecca Ellison, and I live on the 600 block of Hinton Avenue. Our backyard backs up to the Avon Levy property. I would like to express my support for council to appropriate the funds for the for the city manager to purchase the lot. This property is currently severely underutilized, and we all know that the city is lacking affordable housing. I realize the resolution tonight is focused on authorizing the purchase of the land, but I do hope that as you proceed with plans for the property, you consider the needs of the unhoused in our community. While I understand that shelter services are necessary at times, I hope the redevelopment plans also include deeply affordable housing and permanent supportive housing units for those who may not be able to meet the requirements of a residential shelter while they stabilize and move towards permanent housing. We know that housing solves homelessness, so I encourage council and the city manager to continue to prioritize affordable housing and finding a solution to support those who are unhoused in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else like to speak on the consent agenda item? Yes, ma'am.
Frog in my throat. I'm Catherine Walden. I also live on the 600 block of Hinton that runs along the long side of the Levy-Avon parcel. I'm going to stick to the theme of purchasing the property. I am actually happy for the city to purchase that because I do think that there are a lot of services that we can provide, and I think it can be an asset for the community, for Belmont, for Carlton, for Kindlewood, that whole area, that whole development. But and you have said you will do this, I want to hold you all to the promise that you will conduct robust community engagement for this process. It's a big site. It's people walk past it every day. School kids get off the bus and walk down to Kindlewood right by it. You know, there's a lot going on at that site, and there's a lot of potential. So I am going to hold you to your promise to come and speak to residents. I don't mind you purchasing this, but I also encourage you to look for other properties that might be more suitable for a homeless shelter. Like the person just before me, I also think affordable housing would be great on the Levy site, but a shelter has an element of danger, of uncertainty potentially with it that can be extremely disruptive for any residential neighborhood, not just this particular one. So I would urge you, while you're thinking about buying this property, that you continue to look for a place that would be better for housing the unhoused as a shelter. For example, the Greyhound station is for sale right now. It's on Main Street. It's near Salvation Army. It's near bus lines. It's got everything there. Is that being considered? There are storefronts that are completely empty. There are entire shopping developments that are empty. Could not some of those properties be looked at and purchased and maybe repurposed for immediate housing for the homeless? So I don't want you to think that by buying this Levy-Avon property, all your problems are solved. I want you to keep looking for a better site, because I believe there is one out there. All right? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on the consent agenda? Okay. Is there any comments from councilors?
No.
No? If not, may I get a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I move for approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? If not, please cast your vote. Okay, it passes 5-0. Mr. Sanders, is there a report from the city manager's office?
David is going to pull up a presentation that I have for you. So this is my second quarter work plan update, and with it, I'm doing a number of things. So I just worked it all together. And I'll share that I'm, I guess, at least one meeting late in giving you the update, because I promised you a quarterly update, and January would have been when I should have done this, but you know, there's been a lot going on.
Yes.
All right, so this being the update from me as your city manager, one of my promises has been to do my best to communicate on a regular basis, make sure that this public stays up to date on what's going on, and of course, make sure that you get the details to the things that we may be working on in the city manager's office and within the government itself. Just reminding everyone that we're focused on maintaining stability and strengthening the city government. First thing I wanted to do is have you all take a look over my left shoulder here to our new faces in the gallery. Eden Ratliff has joined us as the Deputy City Manager for Administration, and Lionel Lyons has joined as the Deputy City Manager for Operations, joining Ashley Marshall, who currently serves as our Deputy City Manager for Social Equity.
Hey, Ashley.
So for me, this is an exciting time because this is the first time that our full executive leadership team has been filled at the same time. It's a big deal for me because they're here to help. So my goal is to pass on some work beginning, I think I already started passing on work. I was going to say tomorrow, but it's a little late. I've already been given the work to do.
I think that's been the first time in over 3 years. So
That everything is there. So the goal is to have everyone in place so that we can get the work done. Thank you, ladies. I have a cheering section. I like that. I do. I like that. All right. So this, just to help everyone understand how this divides up, this is how we get the work done. So I have the big portfolio there of police, fire, emergency management, as I also serve as the Director of Public Safety, based on what the state says. With communications, economic development, community solutions, our housing and redevelopment work, and then the city attorney at council's request. And then, so Eden will be over HR, finance, IT, and budget, so he'll work with the internal services primarily. Ashley has our portfolio of social equity, which is human services, social services, parks and rec, human rights, PCOB, sustainability, and the Office of Social Equity. And Lionel will have neighborhood development services, public works, transit, and utilities. That just breaks down how the work gets done. I know it looks like Ashley's carrying a lot. I heard the but that is basically a number of smaller entities that we're building out, so that's the reason for the list looking that way. But she will tell you it's a lot of work. I knew she was saying it's a lot of work. So, reminding council of your priorities from your adoption of the strategic plan in September. Your outcome areas, I label them as 10 items instead of 9 items because the commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is the equivalent of a strategic outcome area because there is considerable work that has to be done. And then also reminding you of how I reorganize those based on what I hear from you, what we're spending money on, what really consumes a lot of the conversation. It doesn't in any way suggest that anything is less important. It just really identifies how I view what you are prioritizing, and therefore it helps us internally determine what work we need to do. I would say organizational excellence is the number one issue. If we do a great job internally, we can do a great job externally. So that's really what I would offer to you. So council's vision is to be a place where everyone thrives. And for that, that means everyone. I stress that because it is important for me to not lose sight of everyone who makes up this community and do everything in my power to ensure that the work that's being done is also reaching every one of those individuals. So to do that work, I talk about operational frameworks. That's just what we do internally. So this is a path to realizing council's vision. Those 2 words that you see there, service and impact, are the 2 words that I drive home on a regular basis. The team hears me say it often in many of my messages to them with focusing on quality service and how we can impact lives daily, because I believe that to my core. I came into government because I wanted to fix government. So I don't know if everybody knows that about me, but I've been very critical at times in my past, and my goal here is to influence it to do things that I know it can do. So we talk about community safety and support. These are some of the things that we're focusing on as one of our frameworks. So we're looking at mental health intervention and prevention, violence interruption and prevention, and homelessness intervention and housing insecurity. Those are things that really speak to helping to ensure that we reach everybody where they are and provide to them the supports that they need. There's a number of work product that is there. I shared with council, and we will post what we're working on for our work plans, our work sessions for the rest of this year. These things will be coming to you. That's the reason for me outlining them for you. This is the work that we're currently doing. The alternative response and co-responder model, we have a meeting this week. I believe they're making a pitch to me. Is that what they're doing? Yes. They're making a pitch, and we'll see if we're ready to bring that item forward. We've been looking at opioid abatement and spending money in that space. We also have been looking at violence reduction and a pre-arrest diversion program. So those are things that you can expect to hear from us. And there's been a lot of conversation about homelessness, and all I'm going to say on the matter right now, because I believe I've been very clear as to what it is that I'm prioritizing. We are simply doing a real estate transaction. There is no plan. There is work to be done to determine what that plan will be. We will not do anything without consulting the community. I promise you that. We have public engagement as a part of our communications work because I believe in public engagement, and I prioritize that along with Ashley when the 2 of us were in charge of the city. So I think I just want to state that again for the record. No plan has been set. No decision has been made. I did not say I was building a homeless shelter. And there is work that will come to bring forward what is the best use of the site that you all have just approved. In social equity, we talk about fair, just, and equitable. It's very important for us to remember those words because our goal is to operationalize those words. That's JEDI work: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We have to look at public policy, the implementation of it, and the management and distribution of the services. So we will continue to prioritize how we talk about these things, and the goal is to take away barriers, institutional as well as structural. Some other frameworks that are looking to work with in having this larger team help me: sustainability. I know you like that idea, right? Sustainability is a priority for us. With the creation of the Office of Sustainability, that was my commitment to the public at large that we're prioritizing, and we're going to make sure that that team has what they need to do the work that needs to be done to support the climate action plan that you adopted and to help us get to our greenhouse gas emissions goals. There's a lot of work to be done in this space. Ashley's going to work with them because there's a JEDI component to that, making sure that we are working with people and not doing things to people. And I think there is a real opportunity for an update to you on what that work looks like in the coming weeks. But you also have big decisions in front of you. Your conversation about alternative fuels is one of the biggest decisions that you will make right now of what's on the agenda. And there is significant expenses related to that, and that's operational for us making sure that CAT continues to improve its service to this community. Another framework that I'm trying to prioritize is emergency management, and that's helping all of our team understand that they are a part of our emergency management apparatus. Everyone was pulled to the table when it came to what happened here in 2017. There were a number of things that just didn't go right. It's my desire to ensure that if it were to ever happen again, we would do better, and to make sure that we will always be ready, regardless of what the situation may be. And I believe in all hazards disaster planning because I came from a place that had a lot of disasters. And I think it's important for us to understand that as long as there is an airport, a road, a river near you, there's always potential disaster on the horizon. And we need to always think about it that way and make sure that our team appreciates what their role and responsibility is to managing that. So work sessions, this is how I make sure that you are prepared and get you the information that you may need. So I shared with you the work sessions work that I have completed since our retreat. This kind of gives you an example of what I've started to fill in as to how we will target some of the topics coming before you to give you that moment to dig a little bit deeper, make sure that we can get you the information that you need for the various decisions that you'll make. This is just the first 6 months, and there's spaces left there because there are still opportunities for you to identify subjects that you would like for us to prioritize for you, as well as I'll be working with staff to identify things that they believe are ready to come forward, and we'll bring those items to you for conversations. So the second half of the year, you see, is heavily filled towards the end of the year to repeat what we did with the budget presentations, as you all indicated to me that you appreciated that moment to hear from the directors of the departments as a part of heading into the budget cycle. We're repeating that to give you that same opportunity. We'll change it up a bit so that we can make sure that it's fresh. We won't have them come and say the exact same things to you, so we'll make sure they offer you a little bit, something a little bit different. Some of the items you'll see on here, I have tentative in parentheses because those are placeholders as I see it. I am prioritizing the spreading out of the work so that the various team members can have the time that they need to spend to work on bringing forth a quality update on things that we are waiting to hear more information on. So if that pans out, which I'll be working with them in the next few weeks to make sure, then I'll get you a final version of this where tentative is no longer what's associated with what you see. Are there any questions on what you see with the work session? I'll stop there for a minute. Yes, sir.
Can you give me just a second?
Yeah,
No question, but
and I'll go back just so that everybody can see the others too.
February 27th, alternative fuel
I'm
study
going there
works.
specifically. I knew you were going to say that. It gets its own slide.
I think this is fantastic.
Sorry. All right, again, this is my way of sharing with you things that I plan to have brought forward based on the feedback that you've given. If there are other topics, please let me know, and we'll get to work with staff to make sure that they are ready to bring those items forward.
Mr. Sanders, before you leave this, I would just like to add, a couple of years ago, when I was interested in kind of how council can make more sense out of its schedule, I noticed in my perusing other websites, I think it's Arlington County, that has the same sort of thing planned out, published a year in advance. Here's this month we're going to talk about this month we're going to talk about this. I was saying, that's what we need to do. I appreciate this.
Great. I think it's helpful just for the larger community to even anticipate when we're going to talk about a subject, so therefore they don't necessarily have to come and ask, well, when are you going to talk about a subject? If we can figure that out, we can let them know. They can plan to come based on what we have, and this will eventually be published on the website, and we'll just make the edits from there so that everyone can see it and they can anticipate what's coming up.
I noticed some of these are on Saturdays.
That's only because the date changes didn't happen, so that's not true.
Okay. Okay.
Again, I'm sharing the draft with you.
Yeah,
I didn't realize
okay.
that I had the dates wrong, so I'll fix
Okay.
that.
If they do need to be on Saturdays, as long as they're in the morning.
No. No, they won't be on Saturday. These are your regular work sessions, except the two that I'm going to talk about in a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you catching that because I would not have caught it. I also want to point out, in the packet for this particular city manager's report, I added the comprehensive notes that I took for the January 26th retreat. We had a series of AV issues throughout the day. I went back and watched the meeting myself, and I could understand some of what I said, and then I remembered the rest of what I said. But it really was one of those moments that I do apologize to the public for the moment that we had in not being able to make it possible for people to really follow along that day. I think the report ended up being 9 pages, so if you have some time and you want to know what happened, I caught it. I got it there on paper for you. You can look at that and pose any questions that may come up from that. But I did put that in the packet, and we will post that on the website in the morning as well.
9 pages?
It's part of the agenda, so it's already there.
It's already there. Yeah, it was not, I mean, I'd take copious notes because you might come back and ask me a question later. So this is my slide of just letting you know what I'm working on right now, because I don't think anybody thinks I'm sitting around doing nothing, because you all see how much I'm talking about. But anyway, the FY25 budget, of course, is what keeps me up at night for a number of reasons, but it's what I sleep with because I'm trying to figure out how to get it done. Collective bargaining, comp and class implementation, and just right-sizing the organization are my priorities for this FY25 budget process. So we have some work to do in that space. Series of work sessions coming up over the course of this month to help me prepare what will be presented as the budget recommendation from me on the 5th of March, and then the series of work sessions to follow that where council gets to then start to consider whatever adjustments, changes, or additions they may want to consider.
The 5th of March is when you come to us with
That's when I'll be presenting the city manager's budget at that time. I'm working on plan for sidewalks. I have some information forthcoming. Probably will be ready to tell you all, the public, I should say, some things about sidewalks and how we're moving forward there. Public safety items, as I talked about, the pre-arrest diversion and a few other things that are in that space. Economic prosperity and JEDI being just 2 of those things that we need to do some work to then bring you some information so that you're not questioning what we are thinking, and at least we can ask you, what are you thinking based on what we've done. There's some supports that I'm working on with James and team in NDS specifically regarding the zoning ordinance going live on February 19th. So the goal is to make sure that we are ready to go. Tonight's work session was really about that. I prioritized that work session because I just believed it was important for the public to hear more about these tools and then to be able to pose any questions that they may have for you as well. And then the special work sessions that you do see on your list, based on where I believe we are on these 2 important climate initiatives, I thought it was important that we allow there to be just a little bit more deliberative time to look at these particular matters. So on February 27th, I'm proposing an alternative fuels work session. It'll be a discussion on what council has heard since you were able to hear from Kimberly Horn in their presentation to you last month, and just to be able to provide any additional context that may have come in through the responses, and to really frame up what is the decision point. I think what's important for us at this moment is for you to be clear on what it is that you need to have as part of the decision. You set the timeline. There is no burning timeline except what we have as identified as our greenhouse gas emissions goal, of course, but there is no federal or state deadline that we're worried about. At this moment, it's council making the decision on how do we move forward and in what manner we do that from a financial perspective. So the 27th will be a work session that we will get to work on publicizing and making sure that everyone is clear. 5 p.m. at City Space is what I'm thinking. I know Mr. Thomas is waiting for me to say that so that we can have that ready for you as well. And then I also wanted to just express that the decarbonization work has been probably challenging at best. I think you all would join me in acknowledging that for some of the questions and or concerns as to where we are. I have put a pause on the schedule at this time because I think we need to pause and have more conversations so that we can make sure that we get out of this process what it is that you desire. So I'm proposing another special work session on the 26th of March, solely focused on decarbonization. The discussion will be, what is it that you think about what you've heard thus far? We'll share a little bit more about what we know. I believe it's important for us to add some public engagement sessions, and I've talked to Lauren about that, and it was her recommendation, so I want to support being able to do that. And then that gives us a revised deadline of bringing that study to you at some point in the summer, because we feel like we would have added some additional touch points that may clarify some of your concerns. So that's what I'm proposing to get done over the next couple of months, along with the budget. Any questions about that? Thank you. It's not a lot. So, unless you have anything else. Yes, ma'am.
Is that slideshow in our agenda?
No, I was working on it until we finished, so I didn't get a chance to post
Okay,
it. But I will
I
share
get
it with you. I can share.
Okay.
It'll go on my page. I want everybody to know that. I post all these things. Anything that I present goes on my page on the website, so you can always find it there. I'll make sure that we get that uploaded, and I'll send it out to you in the morning.
Can we add a conflict going on in Eastern Europe to your work plan?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm kidding. I'm
Okay,
kidding.
I'm not doing anything. I did think about being a United Nations ambassador.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
So now we're here for public matters. There are 7 pre-registered speakers, leaving 9 slots for additional speakers on community matters. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We'll now open the floor to pre-registered speakers. The first speaker is Kelly Hart
And company.
and company.
Good evening. I'm Kelly Hart, and these are the Green Grannies of Charlottesville. And we're here because we think it's very important that we meet our net zero greenhouse gas emissions goals, which were talked about. We're here on behalf of our grandchildren, your children, and all future children.
It's all about the bus, about the bus, about the bus. Electrify the bus in Charlottesville. Ride to work, to the store and school. Everybody knows electric buses are cool. It's all about the bus, about the bus, about the bus. Electrify the bus in Charlottesville. We'll save money on gas, that's for sure. So carbon is gone. And the air pure. It's all about the bus, about the bus, about the bus. Electrify the bus in Charlottesville. We need to set the stage and forge ahead. Everybody knows fossil fuels are dead. It's all about the bus, about the bus, about the bus. Electrify the bus in Charlottesville. Okay, city councilors and all our friends. Plug into the future and the message it sends. It's all about the bus, about the bus, about the bus. Electrify the bus in Charlottesville.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Not everybody can make a fool of themselves.
No, you. That was,
Oh,
that
just
was
wait, you'll see.
Thank you so much. Margaret Walker, I hate to have you follow that, but you're next.
I can sing, but I'm not a talker.
Okay, so the next one is Bruce Glasgow. Are you part?
I can speak Spanish, and I'm not going to be trying to sing.
Okay.
But I am going to be talking about the buses as well. But we all love the Green Grannies, and thank you so much for all showing up. Just an amazing group of women. My name is Bruce Glasgow. I live on Lake Forest Drive, and I'm here to talk today specifically about diesel and the diesel buses that the city may be buying over the next 4 years. According to page 13 of the Kimley Horn study, it looks as if the city may be planning to purchase over 20 carbon-emitting diesel monstrosities between now and 2028 to reach a maximum of 52 by that year. And I have ridden on buses on several occasions, and diesel does smell pretty bad. One of the things we've been told during recent meetings is that having more buses on the roads will increase overall ridership and therefore reduce the city's overall carbon load by taking cars off the road. However, according to C3's Climate and Equity Report, diesel buses need an average ridership of at least 9.5 people in order to reach the break-even point with automobiles. Otherwise, they're worse than cars for greenhouse gases. But the pre-pandemic average bus occupancy in our community was only 5.5 riders per bus, and only 3 of the 13 routes surpassed the 9.5 rider break-even point. And that was in 2019. Ridership has gone down since then. Increasing the ridership of the buses needs to be a priority, absolutely. But we should also consider that even if the overall ridership goes up by, let's say, 30%, if the way to reach that goal is to almost double the number of buses on the road, then the amount of carbon generated, both overall and per rider, is going to go up, not down, compared to what it is now. And that's making the assumption that there are lots of riders out there who would be willing to ride more often rather than take their cars if the buses came more frequently. Do we really know that for sure? Anyway, I did some math. 1 gallon of diesel fuel emits 22.4 pounds of CO2 when combusted. And according to the U.S. Department of Energy, transit buses get about 3.4 miles per gallon. Our buses drive about 200 miles per day. So if I did my math correctly, each new diesel bus we buy, and we're talking about, again, buying as many as 20 or more, may, over its entire 12 to 14-year lifespan, emit over 3,000 tons of carbon dioxide. 3,000 tons is a lot. So I found this picture here. This is the HMS Penelope of the Royal Fleet. And that only weighs about 2,600 tons. So add a couple more ships on top of that, and for each diesel bus you authorize, just remember, that's the weight of the carbon dioxide that's going to poison and cook our grandchildren that you're putting into the atmosphere. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Virginia Moore.
Yes.
Oh, pardon. Shawnee West.
Yes.
Okay. We have more slots open up as we speak. Ms. Peasley? That's right. That's what I thought. I saw her. Sharon Bayako?
Yes, and I passed you.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? That's all the people that we had registered. Okay. And then I'll get Ms. Long.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think you know me, but I'll say my name is James Groves. I'm a city resident, professional engineer, and co-chair of the SEVA 100 Climate Alliance. This evening, I too wish to comment on the pending CAT alternative fuel study. Specifically, I wish to report on my investigations into a hypothesis that has been advanced by some members of the City Council and City Administration. Specifically, it has been suggested that the establishment of regular, reliable bus service will be sufficient to motivate car drivers in our community to abandon their cars for public transit. And therefore, even if the expanded buses run on diesel, the city will see a net decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. That hypothesis appears to be disproven by a host of research articles in the science and engineering literature. Researchers have found that those who have the option to use their personal car will only abandon those vehicles for public transit when transit offers a quicker trip from point A to point B. In 2007, researchers studying public transit in Seattle, Washington, concluded that, quote, travel time was the strongest predictor of mode choice. And by mode choice, they mean personal car versus public transit. A 2020 study of public transit in São Paulo, Brazil, Tokyo, Japan, and New York City found that, quote, although car ownership is negatively associated with public transit use, i.e., if you own a car, you're less likely to use public transit, travel time is more likely to affect mode choice in competitive environments, unquote. A 2021 study of public transit use across Norway found that, quote, our main finding is that high public transit shares require that all of the studied factors efficient travel times, direct routes and few transfers, and high service frequency be in place. If any of these is not in place, the market share for public transit is significantly reduced. This most recent 2021 study went on to say, quote, travel time has been found to be the strongest predictor of mode choice, especially when public transit is the alternative travel mode for car drivers. To address the challenge of travel time competitiveness, public transit must pursue strategies such as dedicated bus lanes and signal priority for public transit at intersections. Without such strategies, those with the option to drive their own cars will do so, even when bus service is regular and reliable. I am not aware that Charlottesville intends to reconfigure its streets this decade with dedicated bus lanes and signal lights to give transit intersection priority. Thus, a decision to buy diesel will ensure an increase in greenhouse gas emissions rather than a decrease. City Council, demonstrate that you are our elected leaders, not simply our elected officials. Go electric. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grove. Ms. Long?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I'm Valerie Long. I'm here to speak about the issue you discussed a little bit before your closed session, and that's the pending site plan applications. First, let me just express my appreciation for you all and your willingness to discuss this issue further. It's very important, and we sincerely appreciate your willingness to do so. I just want to reiterate a few of the points. I also understand this is a very challenging issue, that with the change of the magnitude that you all made with the new zoning ordinance development code, it was a huge, momentous event. It was fantastic. It took so much work. I don't need to tell you guys that. This is an important issue, though, and I just ask for your consideration of this request for the 5 applications that are caught up in this pending site review process. Each of those applications, as I and Cadre reiterated in our communication to you last night, each of these involves a significant amount of investment on the part of the property owners and the applicants and their design team. It takes a lot of money and time and resource to get a site plan application to the stage at which it is deemed complete by the city staff and accepted for review. It's not just something you throw together in a couple of days and submit. There's a lot of design. Architects have to figure out how many units can fit on the site, where all the utilities go, all the various things that go into it. It's very challenging. The civil engineers, I don't know how they do that work. It's very complicated. It's time consuming. There was never any notice to the development community about when this date was going to be. The Seville Plans Together team did such an amazing job on their community engagement throughout the process. We got emails every time a new module was released, when new hearings were coming up. Everything was great. It was so nice to be able to go to that website and find anything and everything you needed. This was the one issue, for whatever reason, that was not communicated and did not go through the community engagement process. So we were asking the question throughout, never were provided any information about when that would be. It was certainly, yes, we're trying to figure that out. It's a tough issue, but we haven't made any decisions yet. And so it wasn't until December 13th that anyone who had a pending site plan realized that it was going to be a retroactive date. I thought it was going to be actually sometime in January or February, at the very latest, December 18th. So it's very hard when our clients have invested so much money in the process to bring housing to the community to find out that it's a retroactive date to several months earlier, especially after the applications had already been accepted and reviewed by staff. There's been a lot of investment and resources on both the city's part as well as the applicants. So we ask that you adjust the date to December 18th, and thank you again for your willingness to consider this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please.
Good evening. My name is Nicole Scrow. I'm a land use attorney and developer. I'm here to talk about 2 pretty wonky things, so I'm sorry. For the ADU manual, I'm want to talk about how they calculate rental rates. So HUD publishes data on income limits, and that chart that they publish each year references income percentages and household number. So you have one person in your household, you have two people in your household, you have three people in your household, four. And so you have to translate that into what it means for your rental rate for a studio, a one-bedroom, a two-bedroom, a three-bedroom. So that translation takes some sort of methodology. It's not straightforward. You can't just multiply by 30% and divide by 12. You have to make an assumption that one-person household or a two-person household will be in a studio or a one-bedroom. You have to make some sort of assumption there. And what I found is that the methodology I see is 1.5 families per bedroom, or you do 2 per bedroom, the 1 plus. HUD recommends 1.5 per bedroom, but the methodology in the Affordable Housing Manual, it does 0.5 per bedroom. Anyway, what that does is that for 2 bedroom and more, there's about a $50 to $300 difference, a lower number for your rental rate. And so I'm not sure why we're doing that, because we want to provide an incentive to build larger and more family-oriented units, because that's very hard to do right now. So I would just suggest that we follow HUD recommendations. And then the other thing is FMR is a fair market rent, but that's different from the standard payment that CRHA produces, and that, this is so silly, and that SISRAP voucher. So when you get a voucher from the city, it's either set by the CRHA payment standard or SISRAP, and those numbers are higher than the fair market rent. But the ADU manual says that we have to accept the FMR, not the payment standards. And so it says that 1 in 3 units have to accept the FMR, which is lower than the payment standard and the SISRAP payments. And so I would hopefully change those 2 things to that. All that's to say is I think the ADU manual needs a little bit of work, and I hope it goes back to the Planning Commission, or some sort of review happens. Thanks for your time. Okay.
Thank you. So I hope that, I see staff is here, they got, her comments on that. I got some of it.
I would note that she sent us an email at 5:57 PM today telling us basically
Okay,
that.
so
So
it's written
if you
down.
weren't taking notes as she was talking, you can look at your email.
Okay.
And we also got 2 previous emails about the same
Yeah.
subject as
Yeah.
well,
Good.
from Rory and Josh.
Good. Is there anyone else? Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Wade, members of council. My name is Kelsey Schlein. I'm a planner with Shimp Engineering. I'm also a city resident, but I'm here tonight. I wanted to speak on your consideration or reconsideration of the disposition of pending site plans. So this is the item that Valerie just spoke to a bit earlier. And to echo a few points that she made, the CVille Plans Together process was an incredible process and incredibly transparent. There was always information shared throughout this process, and I want to thank you all for, and city staff especially, for really spearheading that effort that was so open and communicative. One item that falls short is the disposition of pending site plans that where applicants were given notice for the first time that their site plan that had been under review for nearly 3.5 months might not move forward. And so they're in the disposition of city projects resolution that was presented to you all for the first time on December 13th. 3 dates were presented to you as a cutoff for site plan submissions. It was August 31st, which was the date of advertisement of the PC public hearing for the rezoning, for the citywide rezoning. November 21st, which was the date of advertisement of City Council's public hearing for the citywide rezoning, or 1218, which was the ultimate adoption of the new code. So on December 13th, we were given notice that staff had recommended adopting an 8/31 cutoff date. This was just incredibly problematic and somewhat disheartening, as we had asked several times throughout the review process of, can we still move forward with projects where, we know the new ordinance is coming, but we've had these applications that have been in the works, that all the preliminary work that kind of goes into getting something off the ground that have been in the works for months and in some cases even years. And so I just ask that you all consider the 12/18 cutoff date for submitting applications. It is the only date that was not retroactively put forth for consideration. Both 8/31 and 11/21 were retroactive dates to when they were ultimately posted on the City Council's website on December 13th. So please reconsider for the cutoff date to be December 18th, which was the adoption of the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? Kind of off track, I think I have 6 people that have spoken, so we still have several slots open. If anyone would like to speak at this time, there'll be another opportunity later. If not, I will close the public comments for this time, and we'll now have action items. And the next item up is Laura Hildebrand will introduce an item for public hearing.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Councilors.
Good evening.
I'm Lauren Hildebrand. I'm the city's Director of Utilities. This item and the next item on Council's agendas are similar in nature, releasing a natural gas easement. The first item is related to the Highland Park subdivision that's located in Albemarle County, specifically Bellino Lane and Bellino Court. The Virginia Department of Transportation is prepared to accept these roads into the state highway system, and the attached ordinance proposes to quitclaim the existing natural gas easement in order for the DOT to formally accept these roads into their highway system. The natural gas facilities will continue to be owned and maintained by the city even after the easement is quitclaimed to the state, and the city's natural gas facilities are required to remain in their existing location, and if any of the streets cease to be part of the DOT's highway system, the gas line easements will automatically revert back to the city. In accordance with Virginia Code, a public hearing is required to give the public a chance to comment on the proposed conveyance of a property interest, and notice of the public hearing was advertised in the local newspaper at least 7 days prior to tonight's meeting. We also ask council to consider waiving a second reading of the ordinance, and we recommend the approval of the attached ordinance and the quitclaim deed. And I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from councilors at this point before I open up to the public? Well, you have another chance if you like. If not, I'll open this up, the public hearing up for this item. If there's no speakers for this, is there any discussion from councilors on this topic?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
Can you,
Have we closed the public hearing?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I officially closed the public hearing. I'm sorry. Yeah. Mhm.
okay, I'm just, can you say that in, I guess, plainer English? We're letting people have a road, but there's natural gas in it, just for the benefit of the public.
So initially, when the development was first started, we installed natural gas lines in their development before the roads were built. And so we got an easement from the developer. Now, the roads, and we usually locate our gas line easements within the future roadways. And now the roadways are built, and they're ready to be accepted into the Department of Transportation's maintenance system. So basically, the process is that we quitclaim those to the Department of Transportation, recognizing that a developer previously granted us this easement, but we also have some caveats about it. You know, they can't move our gas line. And if they ever choose to not maintain this roadway, and we continue to have our easement. So it's just a process. We do 2 or 3 of these a year, frankly, and it's part of the process when there's a property interest and council, according to Virginia code, has to go through this process.
Okay, thanks. And when was this gas line and road put in?
So in this particular one, we acquired the easement in 2017, and we would have installed it a couple years after that, so it usually is a long process, right? So we installed it within 2018-19, and then the development's being built, the houses, the streets, and now we come to 2023 when we're ready for the highway department to take over the street.
And if we were doing this today, would we still include a gas line in the street?
This is,
like, if this development was being proposed today and we were moving forward with new road and new street and new utilities, would we still?
Yeah, this is located in Albemarle County because we serve natural gas in Albemarle County. It's usually at the request of what the development is doing.
Okay, so it's not an automatic policy from us that we always put gas lines?
No,
Okay.
no. The developer requested that to be done.
Thank you.
That's right.
But it's a good point for the decarbonization study.
Yeah.
Okay, other clarified questions or comments from councilors?
So how do we move this to a single meeting as opposed to 2? Do we have to have all 4 out of 5 or something? There's a...
Point of order, Mr.
Yes,
Mayor?
sir.
So if council wanted to move forward with staff's recommendation, it would be appropriate to move for approval waiving the second reading. If that motion were made and seconded and passed by a vote of 4 to 1, then that would have the effect of dispensing with the second reading.
Is there any time need to do that?
What was your question? I'm sorry.
But there's no deadline for which we need to do that. It doesn't really matter. It just seems cleaner to me to move it to a consent agenda. But
Lauren, did you have any timing matter?
I believe in the ordinance, the wording is also in the ordinance about the waiving of the reading, so we would need to, I guess, make note of that for moving it to a second meeting. We'll just update.
Well, I'm fine with waiving the second reading and moving it along. If there were any reason why we needed to further think about it, that would be different, but I really don't see any reason to do that. So I would move that we waive second reading and approve it tonight.
Okay, it's been moved with the request that the second hearing be waived. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion?
don't really have strong feelings about it.
Okay, well, can we vote?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, it did pass 5-0, so the second hearing is waived, so thank you. And I think you said you have the next item?
Yes.
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing, okay, yeah.
It's for a different development. It's the Dunlore Park subdivision. It's located in Albemarle County. Specifically, it's Marin Court and Varick Street. It has, similarly, they're ready for the DOT to accept the streets, and the natural gas facilities would remain in their existing location. And if DOT ever decided not to maintain the street, the gas line easement would revert back to the city. And in accordance with Virginia code, the public hearing is required since it's a interest in the proposed conveyance of a property interest. Notice of the public hearing was advertised in the local newspaper at least 7 days in advance. And we're also requesting council consider waiving the second reading and recommend the approval of the attached ordinance and the quitclaim deed. And I'm available for any questions, if any councilors have any.
Thank you. Is there any clarifying questions on this project from councilors before I open up the public hearing? If not, I'll open up the public hearing for the release of natural gas easement in the Dunlora Park subdivision. I will close the public hearing, and it's back to council for discussion. If there's no discussion, I'll take a motion.
Yes, I would move the approval of the ordinance for quitclaiming certain utility easements in the public right-of-way from Marion Court, Varick Street within the Dunlora Park subdivision located in Albemarle County, Virginia, with the notion of waiving a second reading of the ordinance.
Second.
Second, further discussion?
I would just like to note that can we, if the developer requests gas lines, we can say no, right?
At this point, it's...
Well, not for these, but for future.
City code provides that we provide gas unless something changes. At this point, we could not do that, but that's a further discussion we're going to have in March.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so in further discussion or questions? If not, we can vote. It passes 5-0, so the second hearing is not required. So thank you, Lauren. Appreciate you coming out. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is Ms. Curry Rainey will present.
Good evening, Carrie Rainey, City Planner with Neighborhood Development Services. Green Retro Salvage Holdings LLC has submitted a rezoning application and a special use permit application to permit a proposed development on the property located at 108, 110, and 112 Langford Avenue. The rezoning application requests a change from the existing R1S small lot residential zoning to R3 multifamily residential zoning, and the special use permit application would request additional residential density and modifications to the front, rear, and side setbacks. The Planning Commission and City Council held a joint public hearing on these applications on November 14th of 2023. After the hearing, the Planning Commission granted the applicant's request to defer the applications to make modifications. The applicants presented the modified applications to the Planning Commission on January 9th, 2024. The modifications included proposing up to 46 residential units, maintaining 2 of the 3 existing structures on the site, providing additional parking lot landscaping, and providing 10% of units as affordable for 99 years. The Planning Commission discussed the proposed preservation of the 2 existing buildings, which they found helped to maintain the existing character and scale of the neighborhood. They also discussed the impact of the property's grade on the placement of the proposed buildings, which helped to offset the impact on the adjacent neighborhood. Finally, they discussed concerns with motorist behavior on Langford Avenue and felt that potential traffic improvements could most appropriately be undertaken by the city's traffic calming procedures. The Planning Commission voted 5-0 to recommend approval of the rezoning application, and the Commission also recommended 5-0 to recommend approval of the special use permit application with the conditions that are proposed in your agenda packet. I'm happy to answer any questions, and Kelsey Schlein with the applicant team is here to give a presentation as well.
So is she going to give the presentation, or if we need
I think if you're ready, I think so.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, maybe I'm misremembering something, but I thought I remember like a year or so ago looking at this overall arrangement that sort of wasn't really a site plan per se, but sort of a development concept. Was there something that was pending longer ago than just a couple months?
No, the first time was the November 14th meeting that it was before at a public hearing. There was a community engagement, there was a community meeting held by the applicant last year, but nothing presented directly to council and planning commission.
I think it was just so much coming at the same time.
Yeah, okay. It all runs together.
And it was technically last year, so.
I was remembering a much longer time. Thank you. I remember a lot of things that didn't happen these days.
Good evening, Mayor Wade and City Councilors. My name is Kelsey Schlein. I'm a planner with Shimp Engineering, and I'm here tonight representing Green Retro Salvage Holdings II, LLC, the property owner and applicant for this property. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and kind of go over some of the nuances of this project with you. Next slide, please. So I want to start off with the timeline because I think that's critically important given where we are at today, being February 5th, and that there is an enactment date of a new zoning ordinance coming in 2 weeks. This project has been under review for a very long time. We had a pre-application meeting in April of 2022, and at that pre-application meeting, after that pre-application meeting, received some comments from the city noting that we should investigate if there was a historic, a grave site, a cemetery on the property, and in particular of a grave site of some critical historic significance. And so we paused the project to contract with a firm to conduct ground penetrating radar, which is not a service that a lot of firms offer, and it is also somewhat difficult to get on their schedule. And so we paused the project, did a lot of research, deed research in the courthouse, met with some neighboring property owners to speak with them and understand if they had any history on the property that they could share about the cemetery. And so after meeting with some neighbors, a lot of courthouse research, and getting this data back that showed that the cemetery was in fact not on the property, we were in a good place to move forward with this application. So in April of 2023, we ultimately made the first application, official application to the city for this rezoning and special use permit request. Had a community meeting, received traffic and OCS comments for the first time in August of 2023, revised our application in response to those comments, and then the last time this application was before you was in November of 2023, where a deferral at the Planning Commission was granted, and largely in response to bring back a project that was of a scale, especially massing-wise and visually, that was much more appropriate for the neighborhood. We came back to the Planning Commission in January 2023 with that proposal. I think ultimately it's a much better proposal, and we're here before you tonight with a full recommendation for approval from the Planning Commission, and we hope that we can have your support on this tonight as well. Next slide, please.
Was that January 2024?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That was a typo. This was. Thank you for noting that.
I just wanted to,
to clarify.
That's what I assumed, but
yes,
just wanted to make sure.
this was that timeline was put together probably the 2nd of January, so it just hadn't switched over in the brain yet.
I got it.
Appreciate you flagging that. So just to call out some context to this site, it is nearly an acre site in a pretty walkable area of Charlottesville. So here we just kind of have shown kind of the bird's eye view of the 20-minute walking shed. Obviously you can't walk in a straight line to all those locations, but especially to Ix Park, to downtown, there are, it's a pretty walkable and attainable route to get to those locations from this site. Next slide, please. And kind of just going into a bit more detail, so the property is located on Linkford Avenue, just northwest of the intersection of First Street and Linkford. It's very nearby the South First Street redevelopment, which the Phase 1 was recently completed, and future phases for quite a bit of housing on that site will be underway here in the future. It's directly across the street from a church, and so it kind of has this kind of portion of the road has a good mix of institutional use, a little higher intensity residential, and then single family kind of residential as you move up Linkford Avenue and along Ridge Street, and especially kind of into the historic protected areas along Ridge Street. Next slide, please. So here's the main revisions from the November concept to the January concept. I think one of the main items in the staff report that really stood out to us, and from conversations with the Planning Commission, was the scale of the project. And when I say scale, not so much the density or intensity, but the mass, and the presence that this project created on the street. And so after reading the staff report, it just kind of seemed really logical for us to remove one of the proposed multifamily buildings that we had as part of this project and preserve two of the three existing structures along Linkford Avenue. And so what you'll see here is we've had to remove one structure for the entrance to the property and to have some on-site parking to serve this development. But we've preserved two, and in the later slides you'll kind of see how that kind of preserves the scale along the streetscape there. Next slide. Another change that we made from the November 14th PC meeting was in regards to our proffer statement. Initially, the proffer statement that we presented designated 12.5 units as affordable, 60% AMI starting at year 10. So it's an 89-year affordability period starting at year 10. Got some feedback from OCS on that proffer, and then resubmitted a proffer statement that is pretty much directly consistent with the inclusionary zoning requirements for 10% of units designated as affordable at 60% AMI for 99 years. Next slide, please. We also had a conversation about just kind of increasing the tree canopy, and so you'll see as part of the special use permit conditions, and this was a condition that was proposed by the applicant, was to basically double the tree parking requirement. That's currently in the city code, and so that is something that if this is approved tonight, a condition of approval for the special use permit will be to double the tree canopy requirement in the parking area. Next slide. And so here's kind of the view from the street. And so you can see here on the top, the November concept was a larger mass. It's not a huge building. They have about a 2,000, 3,000 square foot footprint. So not massive, but just the scale of it is larger than what exists on Linkford. So by preserving the existing homes on Linkford, we're maintaining that streetscape and then working with the grade. There's quite a significant grade change across the property, and then we've stepped the proposed new buildings into the hillside. And so we're fitting quite a bit of density on here, but the visual from the street is really not going to be too much different from what it is today, especially since we're working with the grade here. Next slide. These are just some alternative development scenarios that we kind of ran through of what might be logical on the site if we weren't to move forward with this. I think that the project that we have before you tonight is much better than the original project that you all saw back in November, and so we hope that we can move forward with that option. Next slide.
So we're getting 44 units out of this?
It is 46. Yes.
I misread.
Yeah, 46 total.
And do the existing homes that are remaining, does that count as one unit, or are those being broken up?
They're currently 1 unit each, but one of them is rented out by the bedroom. And so some future scenario, it might be ideal to turn both of those units into kind of over-under units. So just kind of keeping the density at 46 units provides us with that flexibility in the future. And I just wanted to call out some consistency with the comprehensive plan. It was really Chapter 4, Goal 2, Strategy 2.3 that really pushed us to prioritize the preservation of existing structures while encouraging a greater intensity of use. I think we're really directly consistent with that. Next slide. And that is all that I have for you this evening. I'm available for questions. And thank you for the opportunity to present this project to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Comments?
No, I think it's a good project.
Yeah.
How many parking spots are there?
So currently it's 46, one per unit.
Or is there bike parking?
We'll be required to provide bike parking regardless. And some of that will have to be in the building, and we kind of typically incorporate that, in stairwells or storage rooms, something like that, where it's protected from the elements.
Yeah, great.
Yep.
And just a comment, musing, just because I was thinking of it, but it's interesting. Obviously, this is a historic black neighborhood across from a historic black church, across from one of our largest public housing sites, and any change there is significant along a number of factors. It's just interesting, a discretionary process has produced a better project while still having a lot of density and likely to get approved. And I'm curious just what might have been built without a discretionary process. And it's just something I'm thinking through, particularly in our historic black neighborhoods where change is happening. The only other thought as well is I think it's really important that for a project that is justified in part, I think, based on the new zoning in terms of the scale of intensity, that it is matching the inclusionary zoning program. And I hope that's just something we keep in mind for any of these other projects that come before us, where we're kind of between two codes and we're not allowing them to pick what they like and not what they don't like. But in any case, I'm inclined to support the project.
I have two more questions, actually.
Certainly.
Thanks for that, Michael. How many units were in the original plan before the front building was scrapped?
48, Carrie might have to correct me. sorry, but yeah, 48.
Okay. And what's the mix of unit, like 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom?
Well, they're really small building footprints, so it's primarily going to be studios. And 1 bedrooms.
Okay. And I know this might not be part of the details yet, but do you know how much bike storage will there be?
Off the top, I believe it's a half space per unit. That's typically the requirement.
Yes, that's generally the requirement from our code. There's some discretion for the director or the administrator of the code, but that's typically what we apply. Certainly more could be offered, but that would be a minimum to meet.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Other discussion?
No, I'd be happy to make a motion.
Okay.
Okay, I would move the ordinance in the packet approving a request to rezone land fronting on Langford Avenue from single-family small lot residential R1S to multifamily residential R3.
Second?
Asking for a second?
Yes.
Okay, I'll second it.
Yeah.
There's no further discussion. Please cast your vote. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Ms. Carey, is next item.
If I could, there's also a motion before you for the special use permit, if you were interested in granting that for the additional density and reduced setbacks.
I'll also move.
Second.
Second, any discussion? If not, please vote. Okay, that passes 5-0 as well. Thank you very much. And James has the next item.
Good evening, Council. Good evening, Mayor Wade, members of council.
Good evening.
Good evening. My name is James Freese. I'm the Director of Neighborhood Development Services. As I already presented this item earlier, at this point, I believe I'm happy to answer any further questions council may have on the manual.
Yes, I think that, is there any further discussion on the manual? We had kind of stopped at the...
This is on the development review procedures.
Yes, not...
I have nothing further on that. I have some other questions on the affordable dwelling unit one.
I'm good.
Any questions or comments, further clarification down this end?
I don't.
If not, can I get a motion to pass the development review procedure manual?
Yes, I would move for approval, adoption of the proposed development review procedures manual as presented in our packet.
Okay. A second, and then you can have a question if you have one.
I'll second.
With the caveat that we can go back and adjust for
We fully anticipate going
grammar
back
and
and
typos.
adjusting. Yep, absolutely.
As we see what works.
Yeah.
Yes, but also the grammar and typos, please send those on. I'm happy to do
Thanks.
those.
Sorry.
We'll pull out our old Scrivener again and tackle that.
Good old school.
But also, as noted in the resolution, there is a process in place for substantive amendments to the process. And of course, if council wishes, we'd be happy to come back and present at some point at a later date on changes that we've made.
We'd be interested to get, 6 months maybe down the road.
Right.
It'd be interesting to me to get some feedback just on what you've learned from this process with this manual and with the ADU manual we're going to talk about in a second.
Yeah, I think it would be absolutely appropriate somewhere in that time.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a little while before we get some solid feedback on the zoning code, but the zoning ordinance. But I think we could get some pretty good feedback pretty quickly on, how does the development community feel about this? Do you all feel like you're spending a lot more time doing these sorts of things or less time? All of that, I think, would be interesting to know.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved properly second. Further discussion? Okay, we can take a vote. Okay, the motion passes 5-0. We're now doing the affordable dwelling unit procedure manual.
Good evening, Council. Mayor Wade, General Public. Antwan Williams, Housing Program Manager. As this item was discussed at length at the 4 o'clock session, open to any further discussion or questions. There are some notes that we'd like to make based on our earlier discussion this evening with regards to the resolution when we get to that point of tonight's consideration.
Yeah, I think we had to kind of curtail some of the discussion, so now police council has further comments or questions on this.
Well, my overall question, as I look at Figure 1, Figure 2, I'm trying to figure out what this is actually going to lead to. What is the in lieu fee going to be? Is it going to be $337? Is it going to be $395? Is it going to be $325?
Give me a chance to catch up with you, Councilperson. That figure, what page are we on?
Page
For the
3
fee
and
in lieu?
4 of the report, 249 and 250 if you're looking at the council packet. I mean, I don't understand, and maybe I'm just not reading it carefully enough. I don't understand what the answer is going to be as far as what the in lieu fee per ADU would be. Would it be based on the numbers in Figure 1 that don't make any sense in my view? Would it be based on the numbers in Figure 2, which haven't really been explained to us as to why they should be significantly different from Figure 1?
So, sorry to jump in, but I just know we had discussed this extensively in a few of our work sessions, and if my memory is correct, the rationale is the consultant produced 2 calculations for calculating value: construction cost, value gap, that use a different methodology. Value gap is a lower payment, construction cost is higher, And the rationale for having both was for residential districts, construction cost will be used, so the incentive is most to actually build the units on site. But in particularly areas where a large amount of student housing would get built, value gap was used because the greater incentive would be to contribute to the Affordable Housing Fund. That's my recollection, and so it's by geographic area whether construction cost or value gap is used.
Well, so let me just take the bottom right-hand number in both Figure 1 and Figure 2, which have exactly the same definition, but they differ by $70,000.
There's two different models. So the construction model for Figure 1, and then Figure 2 is formulated around the value gap model.
And this was discussed with us by the consultant. There are localities that use both.
Correct.
They both have rational justification, but they are very different in terms of the value, and that's just what we discussed at the time.
And then programmatically speaking, the value gap will apply to student housing in lieu fees and also in context with fractional units.
So the value gap, Figure 2, applies only to student housing
And
and fractional units.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I see in those discussions where there's a reference to Figure 2, I guess we're to intuit that Figure 1 therefore applies to everything else.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that conversation too, Councilor Payne. I can't remember all the specifics of the justification for one versus the other, but it was a cogent argument made at the time. One question I had to do with what Councilor Oshrin asked about earlier relative to the down payment. So I know that I guess we anticipate most of our affordable dwelling units, ADUs, will likely be rentals, I guess, would be the expectation. But some, we hope, with these bonus density will be units that people buy. And I noted the point you made earlier that really all we're looking at is essentially their monthly mortgage, about the 30% and so on. And maybe this is something we really don't have to get into, and this is enough precision for what we want to do for these purposes. But it would be interesting, should we add other kinds of discussion about how much a person, like a standard down payment, 5% or 10% or 15%, or is there anything like that, maybe from the Habitat model that we could? I'm just wondering if there's any value in having some more, clarity around those things, or maybe it doesn't really matter. I mean, maybe all that really matters is what a person's mortgage payment is.
I think there is value, and there is opportunity to have those discussions. Particularly, we can have those discussions as we, for example, consider some of those measures that we are working to expand as part of the toolkit. One of the toolkit measures being introduced and vetted is land banks. And the various programs that can spin off of that resource is something to where you could have those discussions that's programmatically as well.
Right. We're just not there yet.
It's in the sense that it's not complete in terms of the process of developing it. Yes,
Then
we're
doing
not
a few
there.
other things.
Yeah, but we are doing our due diligence to get us there, to get us down that path. But for where we are with the manual and how it meets the letter of the ordinance, programmatically it aligns.
Okay. All right, thank you. That's helpful.
And I'll just jump in for discussion. As I said, the HAC reviewed this section by section. Most of their suggestions have been, the vast majority of their suggestions have been incorporated as I was reading the document and trying to match it up with my notes. I believe that the Planning Commission did review this, or is that wrong?
The Planning Commission has not reviewed the HAC, this draft before us.
Okay. For some reason, I remember a discussion of that they would, but I guess that never happened. But I will say there's time pressure, I think, to adopt this, to align with the new code. I feel comfortable. I think the things that have been up are very legitimate. I would like further discussion about them. But recognizing that this is a living document, I feel comfortable passing this tonight, knowing that we can engage at any time in those conversations. I just wouldn't feel comfortable making on-the-fly changes without being able to have a full discussion and figure out, were these purely things that were overlooked when it was written, or are there two sides to the argument as why it's written that way?
I think also separate conversations ensued beyond the HAC last meeting in different channels.
Correct,
and I think
yes.
if I recall that meeting correctly as well, we had discussed in the future a review part of the review process before amending the manual could also contemplate a joint session between the Planning Commission and HAC. And I think that got discussed very loosely, but nothing got formalized in the time of producing this draft.
I think that this is a solid document. I mean, I think that we will, like these, like the development manual, we're going to have to come back and get feedback and iterate. But we did have these conversations back in the fall about, conceptually, the main conceptual components of this. And we haggled at the last minute, I think, Mr. Freeze, about the whole affordable rental units versus also having a component of affordable units that people could purchase, and I see that in there, so I would be
and I
happy
feel,
to move this.
That the HAC did a deep dive in it as well, so I feel good about supporting it as well.
I agree that there is this sense of a time pressure that Councilor Payne mentioned, but that leads me to a different conclusion, which is I do think it's strange that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about this before, that we didn't get the Planning Commission to get a once-over first, and that we don't really have a chance to have it presented, make amendments, and then go back and see the revisions on our end, because I do agree with what Nicole Scrow said, with what we've got some emails about that same math, and so I would like to have that math be double-checked and explained. Same with the AMI chart, to make sure that those are accurate and those numbers are correct, and then see the adjustments for the subletting parking language and get a chance to get this right. And if, it's supposed to go into effect on the 19th and then our meeting is on the 20th, is that legally questionable for why we can't hear it again on the 20th with those revisions made and those things explained? And vote on it to approve then?
I'll defer to our city attorney in terms of the process. I will say that when, prior to December's decision or action, I think it was presented to us in terms of staff with regards to that the manual will be deferred to provide for administrative alignment, that it was not a requirement for us to go back before Planning Commission. And if I'm incorrect in that statement, I leave room for redirection. But
Councilors, I just want to add, in terms of the housing, in terms of the manual, usually administrative stuff like this, we usually have HAC. It comes under the jurisdiction of Housing Advisory Committee, so that was the reason why we sent it to HAC instead of both to HAC and the Planning Commission. And secondly, if there are things that have land use, transportation implications, or environmental, if you will, then we are inclined to send it to the Planning Commission as well. However, OCS doesn't deal with land use and transportation issues. So we channel everything that deals with housing to HAC, and HAC makes recommendation that goes to the City Council.
So, but to Councilor Oshrin's point, is there a reason why we have to vote on this before the 19th? What is the linkage there?
The ordinance
think I.
It's in support of the ordinance. It's to support the ordinance. The ordinance isn't self-effectuating. So if the ordinance takes effect, and again, I'll defer to city council attorney, on the 19th, and it defers, particularly in a few sections where it calls out the ADU manual that it will provide further procedures and guidance on this particular process or item, if that is not in effect on the same day, the ordinance is technically in effect because it doesn't govern that process.
Could we get around that by saying, okay, we're going to agree to it as is today because we kind of have no choice, and then instead of waiting 6 months to review it because we have all agreed it is a living document, we just review it again on the 20th?
So I will tell you that the staff is already, based on the conversations and the directions about the considerations for these items, and they are very important, reviews already began. So if it comes down to where there is a necessary for staff to put forth a memo to the city manager and city attorney that these tables need to be adjusted, or they deem that they are out of alignment, then I think you have that purview to make the changes to the manual.
If I could, I'd like to ask Mr. Williams if you would just state for what are the specific things based on what you've heard since the work session that you are suggesting that we will review, and then have our city attorney hear that and respond to what he thinks about the step.
So there's been several emails that have been sent, and our technical advisor, RKG Associates, have made response. Staff has not had the opportunity to take that response and basically measure it to what is done to see, are we consistent with Kyle's recommendations and responses. He is online. He can speak to that. He's seen the draft, and he knows where we are.
Right. In regards to which items, though? Which specific items are we talking about?
So we are talking about
I know the rental rates.
The rental rates. Let me find my manual draft here. There we go.
And Mr. Williams, if you could cite us to the page numbers as we move through them, that would
Correct.
be very
Okay.
helpful.
So one particular item of concern or consideration is figure 3, and that's page number 4 of the draft. I'm not sure what page number it is in the packet. The title of that figure 3 is maximum monthly rent considered affordable.
Page 250 in the
Page 250 packet. And where's the other table? I think there's one other table. Is it figure 1, page 3? No, that we just discussed that. That was the construction per unit. So I think it's just that table, figure 3. City
That's
manager.
it?
Yes, sir.
The rental rates?
Yes, sir.
Could we just have Kyle share what his perspective is on that?
Well, is this the same, I'm sorry, is this the same thing to which Ms. Grow was referring earlier?
Yeah, I believe so.
It's the alignment use of HUD rental rates and how it aligns with CRHA in their use of the voucher and CSRAP, correct?
Right, but there's two parts to that. So the C-STRAP and the CRHA one, again, I think I mentioned it earlier in 4 o'clock. There is a provision or mechanism that is available to the Housing Authority for them to do, to why their language can read different.
Okay.
And I haven't committed it to memory, so I don't want to quote what that is.
And I would offer for clarification that we would not want to match anything to the CSRAP program, as that is an elective program that you all have chosen to fund, and there is no permanent guarantee that that program will exist. So I would strongly discourage you from tying it to that particular program. The reason that the income limits are different is because we're trying to be nimble, whereas the federal government is less likely to do that. So the question, as I appreciate it for you, is in regards to whether or not you align with the HUD rental rates or the item that we have identified in this packet.
And that's how they're calculated, the 0.5, the 1.5 per bedroom.
Yeah, and I'll defer to Cal to speak more to that. And I think one of the contexts, contextually, he's going to, I think, speak to is HUD considers household size. Kyle?
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Good evening. So in that regard, the HUD has identified a number of different ways that you can determine what the rental rates are based on household size. In their language, they talk about you can use 1 person per bedroom, you can use 1.5 persons per bedroom, or you can use a custom analysis. And we used a custom analysis. And so if you read the email from earlier today, or any of the correspondence that has happened up to this point, is people have noted that, well, 1.5 persons per bedroom generates a higher revenue for the landlord because you're calculating it based off of, in case of a 3-bedroom, for example, 4.5 people instead of 3.5 people, which is the math that we use. We used 1 person plus a half. And we did that for a number of reasons. And before I even get into that, I will say there isn't a right or wrong per se in which approach, either use the 1 person per bedroom, the 1.5 person per bedroom, or the custom, which is we offered you the approach that we use when we do these analyses. That being said, is the reason we did what we did is because at 1 person per bedroom, where so for example for a 3-bedroom unit you're using a 3-person household, you're getting the least amount of revenue that will be generated for that particular project. Conversely, at 1.5 persons per bedroom, we're going up to 4.5. It has been our experience that generally 3-bedroom units aren't occupied on average by households that large. Now, could you make the argument, well, 4, or not 3.5, but 4, or not 3.5, but 3.8? Absolutely. I want to point back to is the task that we were given was to try and create a financial model to assess the impact on feasibility based on housing policy decisions. And as I mentioned earlier today, it's not possible for us to model every permutation. And so we try and find, the reason I say that is we try and find a middle ground. We try and find something that is fair to both tenants as well as to property owners, to try and find one that doesn't either overreach, for example, saying we're going to use 1.5 persons per bedroom, or underachieve, which is saying we're just going to use the 1 person per bedroom, and as a result create challenges. In the terms of the 1.5 persons per bedroom, you create challenges for smaller households that may be income qualified, so they may be making 60% of AMI, but if I'm a 3-person household that needs a 3-bedroom, but I have to pay rent equivalent to a 4.5 person household because that's what's in the policy, that creates a cost burdening issue because I now have to come out of pocket. I think I did the math at like 35.5 or 36% of my gross income, and HUD defines cost burdening at 30%. Conversely, if you use 3 persons per household and you have a bunch of 4 and 5 person households applying, they can technically pay more based on the cost burdening principles, but you now set the limit below what they could pay, and as a result, it's punitive against the property owner. Now, I go back to the point, and the reason I said this earlier is there's no right or wrong answer. You can set your policy at 1 person per bedroom, 1.5 persons per bedroom, or you can use some hybrid. You could use ours or a different one, or you can split the difference and say instead of doing 3.5 for a 3-person bedroom, we're going to do 3.75 because that's halfway between 4.5 and 3. We did this because in our professional experience of doing this for decades is that seems to be, 1, close to market performance, and 2, it tries to balance and be fair to both the tenants and to the property owners. I encourage you to consider your options and decide what you want to do about it. I did provide Antoine and some information earlier today that he can share with you. We did some math on if it were 3 persons or 4 persons or 5 persons or even 6 persons, because technically you're allowed to have 2 people per bedroom to qualify for HUD programs. And what that would look like and what that would mean from a rent perspective and from, for the property owner income generation, but then also the impact on smaller households looking to get into those housing units. So it's a balancing act. And we did our best to try and provide something that we felt was the most fair for both people who are looking to find price-appropriate housing and for the people who are going to be developing that price-appropriate housing. Rational people can disagree. I think the points made earlier where HUD does single out 1 person per bedroom and 1.5 person per bedroom. Obviously, those are legitimate analysis approaches. For RKG, we felt like we wanted to try and find something in the middle ground, and that's the reason why we went with the numbers that we did. And so as you consider, just think about, and hopefully Antoine's able to share that table with you all as you look at modifications into the future, is that you understand the ramifications of those choices.
Could I ask, or are you?
That was quite a lot.
Yeah.
I would like to continue along two thoughts that I didn't get to complete earlier in the day. One is, let's assume for the moment that on figure 1, the 3-bedroom cost per rental unit, which is the only place in the entire document where cost per rental unit is higher than the cost per ownership condo unit, let's assume that that is not, for whatever reason, reflective of actual costs in the marketplace, but rather simply because of its anomaly based upon whatever people were building most recently. What is the effect in terms of who is being incentivized or disincentivized if that number is too high?
For one, if it was substantially above the actual market cost, wouldn't the incentive be to construct the unit on site rather than choosing to pay in lieu?
Possibility.
I'm going to assume that's a question to me, and if it's not, just tell me to be quiet. But yes, that's exactly what the impact would be. If the buyout price is too high or is greater than what the actual cost for development, you are incentivizing the on-site unit. And conversely, if you set the numbers too low, where they are able to generate greater value by building a market rate unit and paying the money into a housing trust fund, then you'll see that happen. To the point I think that was just made, it was my understanding when we were putting this together that the reason why the recommendation for the ADU in lieu fees was construction cost is that when a whole unit is to be delivered, the intent was to try and incentivize on-site.
That's correct.
As opposed to the partial unit payment, which you're getting less than a half a unit, is to try and make it quote unquote more consistent with what the value benefit that the developer is going to be getting, and as a result, that was the value gap approach.
I'll tell you, as I look at the numbers generated in figure 1, the 3-bedroom cost per rental unit is so out of whack with everything else that, you would think logically it would flow cost per rental unit more or less, the same, roughly the same gap between the first and 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom. You would think that it would have roughly the same relationship, cost per rental unit versus cost per ownership condominium unit. And you gave an answer earlier, talked about method of construction and so on, which I'm not sure I really understand as to why that's relevant to the difference between rental units and condo units, because I would have thought that the cost of construction, or the method of construction, whether it's podium or stick built or what, would not have changed greatly. But in any event, that's the kind of thing that is such an outlier that, to me, it calls into question the wisdom of the overall model. However, if it's a mistake and it ends up creating an incentive to build more units on site, I don't know that I care. Intellectually, it's wrong. Intellectually, this would be rejected by any scientific study committee, any thesis review committee. They'd tell you go back and run the experiment again. They would tell you that that doesn't make any sense, or reconfigure what your criteria are to get something that fits, that makes a pattern. But under the circumstances, if it's going to lead to more, I hope that at some point, maybe next year, somebody will redo the calculations and come up with something that is more intellectually defensible. But if the practical effect of this is that it's going to create more rental units more affordable units being built on site, more power to them.
Two follow-ups. One question to Kyle. Kyle, if I remember correctly, earlier in the 4 o'clock session, you mentioned that there was a distinction between the footprint, what you found in the market with regards to size of the rentals and the ownership. I wonder if that has any implications with regards to the cost per square foot and why that figure might be different from any practical level.
It shouldn't really have an impact on the cost per square foot because the cost of materials between, let's say, a 1,300 square foot unit and a 1,500 square foot unit aren't going to be that different on a per square foot basis. What the size anomaly, as the council member is alluding to, does, because you jump from a 1,000 and I think 50 or 80, I forget exactly the number off the top of my head, up to 1,500.
Okay.
And so that's what the data shows. I understand the confusion because it is a substantial jump from one number to the next. But this is the result of the analysis. And so we were tasked with providing you with what those numbers should be based on what we learned through our assessment.
And
if you wanted to make it more in line with trying to say, well,
could I just interrupt? I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Could I interrupt? Are we basically agreed we're going to vote for this? Because if we are, I'd like to go ahead and vote for it.
Well, that's where I'm at. And I would just-
There's another question that I wanted to get at, and that is this. Nationwide, the research that I've seen suggests that sort of the sweet spot in the market is a 1,200 square foot 3-bedroom apartment. You've said that your model is a 1,500 plus square foot apartment. The 2-bedroom model is also, that you're using is also larger than what seems to be the nationwide average of what's being built these days. Do we want to be, I guess my question is, by doing it this way, are we incentivizing building larger and larger units, or can we, frankly, I think what we ought to be doing is to incentivize or at least legitimize smaller units, which are necessarily going to be more affordable. And what we're ending up doing is saying we're going to have you build units that we think are going to cost $547,000 for a 3-bedroom unit because it's going to be 1,500 or 1,600 square feet.
I think after a certain point when you're building, the number of units within the apartment matters more than the square footage of the apartment, because when you add 3 bedrooms, you're also adding another bathroom, and plumbing is expensive. And so there's like, if that 3 unit is 1,200, it's still going to be more expensive than if it's a 2 unit that's 1,200 square feet.
Well, that could well be, but a 1,200 square foot 3-bedroom unit is going to be cheaper than a 1,500 square foot.
I know a little bit. What I heard is that staff and the consultant talked to local, developers and community. And one thing I learned here a long time ago is Charlottesville is unique. What things that happen in other places is different here. So, you've mentioned it several times. We know that you support 1,200 or smaller units. I think that the developers will build what the people will purchase.
My question
rent.
is whether we're incentivizing them to build something that is larger than we really ought to be trying to incentivize. It's like trying to steer folks into bicycles instead of cars. Should we be steering people into accepting smaller apartments? A 1,200 square foot apartment is not a small apartment, by the way. It's just not as large as a 1,500 square foot apartment, and it would probably cost about $100,000 less, according to rough math. So I just think, I wonder whether we ought to be taking on the position of saying it's okay to build smaller units.
Part of my approach, and while I'm prepared to vote on this tonight, is that's not my interpretation of what this will do. I think there is a reasonable argument that could be made that maybe that is, but I think there's just no way we're going to know how the market responds in full until the market starts to respond, and we can use that data and adjust over time. I know the current draft says we'll review these numbers annually at a minimum. These numbers were based on market conditions at the time the study was done. I think that's a reasonable basis for these numbers. There may be something about the market at that time we just didn't understand that's producing that anomaly, and it's totally reasonable. The market at this point will have changed, and we'll review that in a year and be able to look at that data, as well as have data about how the market did respond and if it is inadvertently producing an incentive to reduce units. But I just feel like I'm not in a position where I could confidently predict that as an outcome.
Yeah, I think I heard a question to call the vote on this.
I want to add one small thing. Is there any update about the subletting the parking spot?
No, I don't have details on that with regards to our discussion from earlier. I have to consult the minutes from those particular meetings to see if there was a reason why that language was introduced.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to know that.
Okay.
That's one of my
So is the notion that we're going to
asterisks.
hopefully vote for this tonight so that we have it in place for the 19th, but if there's further additions or modifications that need to happen, we'll do that expeditiously?
Expeditiously is a good word.
Yes.
Some
Well,
months
it-
down the road.
At any time, we can email the city manager with specific concerns and requests and then have that move through staff if on our end there are things we
Yeah,
want
I
to
would
change.
be interested in, Councilor Snook, your points, if you could maybe summarize them in a way that I could grab a hold to and see what staff has to say. It'd be interesting to know. I think, though, that I agree with Michael that it's just going to take a while. And also, we paid this consultant to help us. Not that consultants are always correct, of course. I totally get that. But I feel like we have some... I have a degree of confidence, I guess I'll put it that way, in them and in staff, so.
Before you take an action, can we hear from our city attorney just for clarification on what his thoughts are in regards to passage and immediate change if that were to be desired?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Manager. Certainly, I echo what Mr. Williams has said. It is important to enact an affording dwelling unit manual as a companion piece to the new zoning ordinance. That said, if there was a minor issue that would encourage council to want to take action on the 20th instead of this evening, a 24-hour period during which government business would likely not take place would not be material. Anything more remote than that, then it would be important for you to enact a manual that is in place at the time that the ordinance becomes effective. But as Councilor Oshrin has indicated, to the extent that there are issues, and certainly there has been a discussion about some issues that are raising significant questions, council may direct that those items be revisited. I think the word was expeditiously. It can provide a suggestion as to that happening, and that could happen well before the one-year review if that was council's determination.
Okay, so I would move for approval of the ADU manual as proposed in this packet with the expectation that within 2 months, we would have some feedback on the issues raised tonight.
Second.
Further discussion?
I'll just say that although I think that there are flaws in this, as I've pointed out, I will support it.
Okay, thank you. We can vote? Okay, the motion passes 5 to 0.
Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Before we go to the other business, we had an item that we added to the end of the agenda. It was a letter that we received on the vet.
Well, does the I'm sorry.
The budget issue.
Consent
No,
agenda.
Did I miss it? I'm sorry.
Item number 3.
Yes.
The one we took on the consent agenda?
Yes, that's right, yes.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
Three.
3.
We'll come back to you. No, we'll come back.
Oh.
We'll come back to you.
The budget.
3 is the budget item.
Actually, it's 6.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It
you're
had
right.
been number 6.
Yes.
It's the budget item that I was
The,
referring to, I'm
the,
sorry.
the surplus, the end of the year surplus.
Yes, end of the year surplus.
Okay. Following our protocol, so we're going to deal with that. There was no formal presentation this item. Would you like to hear from the Director of Finance further, or are you looking to hear from me?
I'm sorry.
I'm asking.
Yeah, I'll just talk to you probably. It's fine.
That's what I expected.
So we're facing, so when this first came to us 2 weeks ago, that was before at least I knew the sort of impact of this current budget, the FY25 budget that we're working through. I think I've heard numbers like a $5 million bust. I think it really depends on.
It's moving.
Yeah.
It's more like 4.
Okay, so that's great. And in our work session last week, there was, I think, a laudable willingness on the part of council to increase taxes as need be, with the understanding, due to the fact that this is keep using this term from my engineering days, but a step change in terms of how we're planning to pay and treat our staff. Frankly, it's overdue. We've been talking about this at least as long as I've been on council, that we need to make these investments in our people. And I fully support making those investments, class and comp and in the collective bargaining, in a single year. I realize that trying to do that over multiple years makes no sense. But for the same reasons, I think that trying to cover this, ongoing expense immediately with tax increases only is not fair to people in Charlottesville. I think that doing that over the course of a couple of years, where we see, A, what people's tolerance are for increased rates, and B, what the economy does. We've been very fortunate, maybe 2 years from now or a year from now, the economy is such that we might not need to raise rates. So my only point was that we've got this money in surplus. I guess the policy is that we invest a certain amount back into the CIP contingency fund. It seems like the 15 million is more than what the policy would call for. I don't know. But my point was simply, let's invest $10 million, $12 million back into the CIP contingency fund and use a little bit of money to help us smooth out, instead of going from A to C, go from A to B to C, as kind of a tactical approach to meeting a strategic goal of funding our city appropriately. So that was my point.
If I could just add on to that, as thinking through it, I'm just trying to say it out loud to clarify my own thoughts. But so to make the strongest argument I can for your case, we would use this surplus money to cover it this year. In the case that we are overly pessimistic about our revenue assumptions going into next year, we'll be in an information environment where we'll know if we were too conservative or if we were on the, if we were too conservative, if we were on the money. And if it turns out we were too conservative, we'll be in an information environment then where we can know for certain, okay, we still have to move forward with tax increases, but there's still a chance that maybe we didn't. And so that's the argument. We can get ourselves there. So is that
That's,
accurate?
yeah, I like the way you phrase that. For me, I see it as we should explore using part of a surplus. We should explore raising taxes. We should explore taking a hacksaw, not a hatchet, to some pieces. And we should also realize that we don't have to figure all of this out this year. We can set ourselves on a trajectory so that, as you said, an informational environment a year from now.
Well, and my question is, if that's accurate either to our budget team or the city manager, if that summarized it accurately, why would you still recommend against that action? And then two, is this conversation for what we're voting on tonight moot? Because at any point, we can, as council, take money from the CIP contingency fund if we chose to go in that direction.
I don't want to answer that question until you all have spoken back. Tell me whatever.
And to add to that, because we have been so warned against the use of one-time money and what it might do to, I mean, in the sense of it not being good forward thinking, I get, but also it has potentially some effect on our credit status. Would using it from the surplus now be looked at differently from a credit perspective than moving it from the contingency to the budget later?
Yeah.
Well, later is probably going to be like in a month.
Well, sure,
I
but you know,
what we're
not
doing tonight
tonight.
is voting on
Yeah, we're
whether
dealing
gonna
with it
put
tonight,
Yeah.
so, you know, everything after tonight is later.
Yeah, I thought that, you know, when we had this discussion, it was just last week, wasn't it? that
It was
we
just
met?
last week.
That the people that look at our numbers, that, you know, they want to know, you know, how we use this money and is it sustainable, and they may not look favorable upon that. I would be supportive of it if it would not impact our credit rating, and because we're able to do a lot more with the good credit rating as far as getting money cheaply than this one-time fix. But, you know, that's just kind of where I am. I certainly can be convinced otherwise.
And I'd push back a little on the whole one-time piece. Yeah, but true, but this is not like ARP money. It's not like from an outside source. This is us deciding with revenues that were raised and expenditures that were deferred last year, how we want to invest that going forward.
Yeah, but that money we're anticipating, which is tax revenue, let's call it that, is already anticipating use for this year.
It's a surplus, though.
So
we don't know if we have a surplus yet. I'm talking about
what we're looking at tonight, which
Well, I
is
think-
addressing a surplus from last fiscal year.
Yeah.
Right, we don't know if we're gonna have a surplus again next year.
Yeah.
But this
Right.
buys us time to find that out.
Right.
Well, I think you know, the more I thought about it after I was frankly the one who had said, let's talk about raising real estate taxes by 4 cents, I went back and looked at the first thing that came to my mind was, how are we going to sell it to the citizens of Charlottesville that we've got a $21 million surplus and we want to raise your taxes for $4 million? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to them, and I don't have a good answer for them, except that we've got a particular rule that we're trying to follow that says we shouldn't do that. But then I went back and looked at what's actually being allocated out of the $21 million, and we're already allocating about $3 or $4 million for recurring expenses. The unfunded 2% retiree COLA granted in FY24, $2.6 million, that's not going away next year.
I know.
What's what?
That is one time.
Keep going.
Is there going to be a COLA next year?
That's already there.
It's already budgeted.
So why was this one not
So that is tiding
funded?
us over.
So if you recall, the last year, it has been a city practice to grant retirees half of a COLA of what regular employees get. We assume, as part of the actuarial assumption, that city employees will get roughly a 2% COLA, and a 1% COLA is included for retirees. So that's part of our actuarial assumption. Last year, the city granted a 6% COLA to employees, and retirees got 3%. So there was a 2% COLA for retirees that was unfunded. So that's this one-time payment to make up for that, and then going forward, that's covered. But it's a one-time actuarial payment to reduce the liability that was created for the unfunded 2% payment.
But are they going to end up getting that same amount next year plus some COLA?
No, so they are funded for what they are currently being paid, which includes the 2% they got last year. If you grant an additional COLA
for '25 that is more than 1%, we would have this same situation. So this is something that we've done over the last few year-end appropriations, if you recall. We have made an extra payment to the retirement fund to pay down this additional liability.
Okay, I'll have to take your word for it because I frankly don't understand it. How about the city refuse contract, contractual CPI increase, $400,000? Is that going to get paid next year too?
That is already built in the base for what we're working with. That contract is a mid-year contract that we had nothing to do with the price increase. We got a huge increase in the middle of '24, so we're using the surplus to cover that $400,000 loss or unbudgeted expense, if you will. And then that is now part of the base for '25.
Okay, so that is going to be a recurring expense.
It is a recurring expense that we're already accounting for in all the numbers we've given you for '25.
Okay, but my point is that if what we're trying to do is to say we're only going to use this $21 million on things that are not going to be recurring expenses, that is a recurring expense. It will come back to us next year.
That amount is not a recurring expense. That is a one-time expense to address the increase in the prior fiscal year.
So is the coming fiscal year's contract going to be less than last year's?
It's being baked into the budget that will be presented to you. I'm accounting for it in your ongoing budget.
Okay.
This is just the makeup of the increase.
Okay.
One time.
Okay. So it is going to be higher than what had been originally budgeted for last year?
Last year.
Okay.
Yes.
So it is a recurring expense.
That 437 is being budgeted for. There's a
Okay, you were
difference.
budgeting for it, but it's a recurring expense.
Got it.
And, some maintenance fund for city leased properties, I've never understood why maintenance would not be regarded as a recurring expense.
So in that case, as you all have worked with Ms. Kelly on developing rental agreements and lease agreements for city-owned property, we're not talking about like City Hall or the annex. We're talking about properties that have been acquired like through the Zero East High property purchase and other things. There is not a pot of money beyond any normal maintenance money to cover a recurring maintenance that may happen with those properties. So this $200,000 is intended to be a seed pot of money to help cover the maintenance for those properties. And then the idea is the rent from those properties will go into an account so that we can then have the funding to cover that maintenance.
So, Lord, are you planning to go down like every expense?
Well, my point is simply this, that I think that we look at, we have tended, and I will include myself in this, we have tended to look at this as being sacrosanct in some way that we're not going to use for ongoing expenses. But I remember my first year on council, we went ahead and we put money into, I think it's a certain fund, I don't remember what it was called at the time. I think we call it Pathways now or something like that, but it was a fund that was clearly a recurring expense. We've done things like that in the past. And as I'm looking at $21 million versus a $4 million shortfall, whatever it's going to be, I just don't see this as a place where, at a time where it makes sense either politically or financially to be raising taxes because we're adhering so firmly to this rule.
I would just note the scale. One, there were ongoing permanent expenses before we even started council that were funded, and in one sense you could say that council forced through that expenditure to become permanent, and I mean that was kind of a good thing because there were some good things that happened with, but it was still a mess our very first budget cycles that was difficult for both us and staff to clean up, and it was a mess. And when and that wasn't on the scale of like $10 million. But I would say for tonight, I'm prepared to fully support the staff recommendation as in front of us, in part because what's in the CIP contingency fund is still flexible. Even if we were to change our minds and go against all of our staff's recommendations on use of one-time funds for permanent expenditures, We
Yeah.
don't need to amend
Are we sure
tonight's
about that?
allocation
So-
to do that.
Does it matter for credit purposes if we reallocate the funds tonight or if we pull them from the CIP later?
So, there's a couple things, and do you want to speak? Because I don't want to step on your
I
toes.
would. We need to walk all the way back.
Agreed.
I think it would be
That's
helpful
what I
if we
was gonna do.
just come all the way back to when we first brought to you the surplus item. Make sure that everybody's understanding what we need to understand. When the item was presented to you by the Director of Finance, my follow-up statement to his bringing it forward saying that through practice, through policy, we transfer the balance to the CIP contingency fund. My statement to you was, I would recommend that you do this because I will need this money. Most of it was, not most of the 15 million was being generated by vacancy savings, and that I imagine that we were going to find ourselves in a position that I would need most of that money to balance the collective bargaining contracts, of which there are 3, and the implementation of the comp and class study. That has not changed. So when you received your budget preview last week, we did not spend any time talking about the surplus because it's one-time money, and the intention is to use as much of it for one-time expenses related to those 2 priorities that this body adopted as its priorities. So this is focusing on the use of what is a one-time balance of about $15 million, trying our best to keep you focused on using it for one-time expenses. The reason for that is it just makes sense to do that because there's no guarantee that the source will replenish itself next year to that amount. So we don't want to have you create a budgetary expense that's tied to that amount if that amount does not produce itself through tax revenues or however else can drive that. So that's going back to the original action related to this item. There are one-time expenses related to implementation of collective bargaining and comp and class that are about the same actuarial purpose. That's what I'm going to be asking you to use that money for. Tonight, if you follow this basic logic with me, we have tried to help our public understand that the Avon Levy is a real estate transaction. Tonight, what we're asking you to do is shift the money into the CIP contingency to let it rest. Not to spend it. It is not attaching it to any project. It is to place it in reserves to conclude our FY23 process. That's what we're asking you to do tonight. That money sitting in the CIP contingency is flexible because it's not tied to a project within our CIP. That's why it's labeled contingency. And also to remind you, the CIP contingency in this past year has been put to great work on your benefit and your behalf. K-Tech, Dogwood Portfolio, and closing the Premier Circle gap were all pulled out of the CIP contingency. So I remind you, those were flexible decisions that you made, and that was the source of it. If we tie this now to the implementation of collective bargaining and comp and class, you have fully restricted yourself from even having those options, and we all know that you have decisions still coming. Alternative buses, alternative fuels for EV buses. You're going to probably have another affordable housing project that is not in the 5-year CIP that we're bringing to you, as well as a whole host of other things. And I can't not remind you again, you have 3 additional bargaining contracts coming down the pike. They all come at a cost. So we don't need to spend any one-time resources on recurring expenditures until we get through more of this budget planning. The secondary part of what we're asking you to do as of last week is just to decide if you're willing to advertise a higher rate or not. We need that clarity. If your decision is that you're not going to advertise any increase, we have work to do. If you are considering advertising, we just need to know what do you feel comfortable putting in the paper. And yes, it is telling the public that you might increase the tax rate. Our goal is to do, and she just met with me earlier this morning, trying to avoid you even having to take that action. So we're not pro taxes. We're trying to just get through this last 30 days because there are 2 very big items in front of us that I consider from the very beginning as your top priorities for promoting organizational excellence, and that is collective bargaining and comp and class. We can make other decisions, but we need your clarity of direction so that we can then do that work.
So I thought in the meeting the other night, we were very clear that, yeah, we're happy to advertise 4 cents. Didn't we say that?
No, we did not. We were asked to bring you back scenarios, which is what we're going to share with you. And then from that, we hope that you give us the clarity of what you might be willing just to advertise. Again, for the public's benefit, this is to advertise, not a commitment that anything will change.
Can we give him that direction now?
Yeah, I thought that.
My recollection was that we
Yeah.
had agreed to advertise that
Yeah.
with the caveat to the public that that doesn't mean we are raising taxes and not all of us are planning on raising taxes.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think we said
That's what I thought we had done.
We prepared
Oh,
3 scenarios because we walked away from that room believing that you wanted scenarios that were tied to real estate, lodging, and mills, because property tax was likely not of interest because it was a small amount generated.
Yeah, and
That's true.
I don't
And
think-
I
We
wa-
wanted those
I don't
scenarios,
think
but
any
also you
staff
had the
walked away with
flexibility.
clarity.
I walked away with the same impression that the city manager provided, so clearly there was.
Not clarity.
We were not.
And we don't need you to decide. I don't want you to decide anything right now. You ask us for scenarios, I have them. We're going to show those to you. I also don't want you to make that decision now because you have not met with your school board, who has a big ask in front of you that is twice the size of what I've committed to them. So before I am ready to advertise anything, I'd like the clarity of, are you going to tell them 6 is it? Or are you going to tell them a different number? If you tell them a different number, which is your purview, and I'm not telling you not to, but if you do, that expands what I have to find.
Okay.
I will do that work if you give me that direction, but right now I don't have that clarity.
And so I think some of the reason why we're all hesitating on passing the budget amendment for last year is because we just, for public's benefit, but also just to recap here, is we've only seen the proposed revenue side of the budget. We have
Yes.
not yet gone over expenditures. We have not yet gotten a chance to discuss where we might want to cut things or whether or not the revenue, I mean, we maybe could have asked this in the meeting, but this is in my list of questions that I already talked to you about. We might want to reassess some of those revenue adjustments based on historic accuracies.
Which is why we're trying to get, what is your appetite in the tax conversation? This is our process. We haven't changed the process. This is the way we've done it. This is my first time going through it, and I thought I had clarity on how it worked, and I was ready to roll with it. But ultimately, we're asking, where are you in that space? Because if you are just adamantly opposed to the consideration of a tax increase, that is a decision, and I will accept that, and we'll move forward. But if there is any room for any consideration, we just need to know what that is.
Well, yeah, there is, and I thought we made that clear the
Yeah,
other
well,
night.
it wasn't, obviously it wasn't clear. I thought it was too, but
There's
good point.
flexibility, I think, at least among 3 of 5 of us to.
But I think we also think it's not the first resort.
Right.
Right, but I think what I walked away, or I guess zoomed away, unclear about was what our consensus was on the mix of what to advertise.
That is correct.
the different
And,
options.
and that's the scenarios that they were going to
Yeah.
give. But I thought we gave like high-level parameters of what we'd be willing to accept on any.
And I'll just say, I am fully in support of passing what had been on the consent agenda as presented by staff, in part because I think we will still be in a position to continue this same conversation if passed as is, and maybe I'm just misunderstanding something, but if we were to amend it, to me it seems like we're almost just playing a game with what something is named on a spreadsheet, and in part, that surplus will, even the CIP contingency will very likely have to be spent on just one-time expenses that are coming anyway. And so we're not really saving ourselves any difficulty, and at some point, we just have to deal with the consequences of the budgetary decisions we make.
And I agree with Michael on the can I get an answer to my question about our credit?
Yeah, so I was gonna, few things, just to kind of wrap up and address a couple questions I've heard. So from a budgeting standpoint, we, as we talked about last week, revenues need to match expenditures. That is true for every year and every budget that you pass. From a rating agency standpoint, the rating agencies want assurance that those revenues are sustainable to match the expenditures that you plan. And that means that if you are planning on a substantial increase in expenditures, which we know they are with comp and class, collective bargaining, everything else you want to do, we know that one-time money is not sustainable. As we've talked about, we're in this situation, we've gotten large real estate increases. We have, as much as COVID is history in the rearview mirror, we are still trying to recover from projections that are trying to dictate human behavior with lodging, meals, sales. And as we've seen, that trend is coming down. And so, to your point, when we are using, it is the argument that could we use one-time money to balance the budget? Sure, you can, but the problem with that is if you don't have revenues that are sustainable to the amount of your expenses, you have no off-ramp next year, but another increase. So
I understand that, but there's this basic logical thing that I guess I am not saying that ultimately we don't fully fund everything. I'm simply saying that with revenues, I get that. But what I'm saying is, what I've heard is that this is going to be a really dicey year, and we need to somehow smooth that. And if we're sitting on $16 million that we could use $3 million of to help smooth that, I don't know if I was running the ship, that's how I'd do it.
But I said that I'm doing that. I am going to do that. That's not a question.
But
That has been my statement from the beginning.
And I think the other thing is there's no action for you to take right now. If you said, I want to use $5 million of the fund balance, or I want to use $3 million of the fund balance, there's no action for you to take because you don't have the budget yet. So I think whether our message was confusing last week or somehow we've made this to be a much more impressive issue, then you all don't need to make a decision right now. But the question was more, do you want us to balance the budget based on an assumption that you will raise taxes, or do you want us to balance the budget based on that you won't and there's maybe a possibility? So to get back to your question, we have a policy, a financial policy, that is anything that is over and above 17% at the end of the year, i.e. a surplus, goes to the CIP contingency. None of that CIP contingency can be spent without it coming back to council for further action. So whether you decide to spend it on the CIP for a project, whether you decide we present you with a budget and you don't like that part of it, and you say, hey, I don't want you to do this, I want you to use the CIP contingency, you still have that lever to pull in March.
So it's no different if we pull it today versus in March from the CIP contingency?
Correct. And I think from a rating agency standpoint, there are definite triggers for things, and management and council's ability to make decisions is one of those. So if you follow your policy, put it in the CIP contingency, you're following your policy, number one. Number two, if you decide that you want to use it, you still have the ability to exercise that option. But we've had the opportunity to finish the budget and present you with our best proposal. And we have some scenarios for tax rate increases that you may hate, you may love, we'll get some feedback, and then the city manager can decide what to include in his budget.
And we are saying the same thing. I think we're not hearing each other. The CIP contingency is how you smooth this process.
Okay.
I am on the same page with you and absolutely suggesting that, and maybe that didn't come out as clear as I intended. But again, when we presented the item initially, my response was, and I'm going to need it. That hasn't changed. That has not changed.
So could I move the adoption of this item?
Second.
Yes.
Further discussion? All in favor, please vote. Thank you so much.
I love the robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate your being willing to entertain.
Thank you.
And I would just offer, can I offer one more point?
Yes, ma'am, of course.
So when you talk about it at providing flexibility using the contingency, it absolutely does.
Yes.
If you wanted to use $3 million of your contingency instead of raising taxes, and you wanted to layer in these extra expenses, That gives you flexibility.
That's the word I'm looking for, layer.
This year. Because now you have those expenses baked in, so when you get to the budget next year, that is already a foregone expense that you will not have that flexibility next year. So if you only have, if you use $3 million this year and you only have $3 million of new revenue next year, you have no flexibility next year.
Right, but if we raise taxes by two pennies this year and then 2 pennies next year, people won't feel 4 pennies in the same year.
And I'm agreed, not arguing that at all, but it would require you to do the 2 pennies next year.
I understand,
Right.
that's.
Chrissy, you're gonna get Lloyd riled up again, so you can try to quit while you're ahead.
I'm gonna get on mine too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, James, I think now.
Now let's talk about something easy and non-controversial, right?
Do y'all want to take a break?
No.
Roll.
Let's do it.
I wonder if I could just raise one legal issue as you begin this discussion on, this is the project vesting, am I right? Okay. There were some statements during public comment that I'd like to just perhaps place in context, if I might. There were some references to not having notice and the implication being that this came as a surprise. And I just want to emphasize a couple of points. One is that the state of Virginia law on what happens in a general rezoning with respect to vested rights could not be more well established. It is contained in section 15.2-2307 of the Code of Virginia. And as Mr. Freese alluded to earlier, subsection A outlines the 3 factors regarding vested rights. 1, a significant affirmative government act. 2, a good faith reliance on that significant affirmative government act. And 3, diligent pursuit. Those who are making decisions about moving projects forward during a period when the city is considering a zoning amendment or a comprehensive rezoning are fully aware of that law. It comes as no surprise to them. The surprise was that staff recommended on December 13th, if I'm correct, Mr. Freese, something better, a bonus, something more than what the law requires, which was to permit projects to proceed under the old ordinance that legally would not be permitted in the absence of action by this council. So I just want to frame that discussion because the idea that there would be some mystery about what would happen under well-established law is misleading, and I wanted to make sure that council was aware of that. And Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the opportunity to provide that legal clarification.
Thank you very much. So you don't have a presentation?
I don't have a presentation. I spoke earlier, and we were just about to get into questions from the council. So
further discussion. I know we have Valerie here, and she's. Are you Valerie, part of the cadre? And
she forwarded the letter.
Forwarded the letter. If it's okay with,
I will. Whatever people want to go along with, respectfully, I would say my opinion, and that is not following the normal order and course of business for council. To have a representative of industry come to formally speak for a non-scheduled presentation, but that's just my perspective.
Well, let's have discussion on essentially the vesting of projects.
You gonna go first? You want me to go first?
I'm happy to go first, but I mean, I'll say again, as was stated, the rules are very clear. The rules that people who are paid well to closely follow the rules all know. I don't say that with any ill will or that anyone is acting in bad faith. But I feel strongly staff made a recommendation. There was a reason for that recommendation. And we have to make a decision based on the total impact of all projects in the city, not based on any one project or person. And I feel it is absolutely going to be not in the best interest of the city to have projects come before us that are following under both sets of rules, where we're going to get a special use permit or a rezoning request coming to us, where the developer will be pulling from both codes what they like, but not having to follow the things they don't like. And I worry that is going to be similar to what we went through with the Verve and 2117 Ivy projects, which were very bad public policy. And I also worry about the impact on the affordable housing requirements getting skirted. And I think where there are legitimate complaints, I feel like it's coming from a lack of trust, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like some actions other than this and conversations with NDS and our staff could resolve some of these tensions without the citywide unintended consequences. So that's wasn't very clear, but that's...
Can I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes.
So just a question, I've got a separate thoughts I want to share, but just a question about what Michael just said. If the projects were allowed to continue according to plan, would they be balancing between two zoning codes, or would they be in the past zoning code and that's it?
So yeah, let me clarify that comment. A project that is vested, either under state law or under what we call this legislative vesting, if it's coming in under the old code, it's coming in entirely under the old code. Soup to nuts, it is old code. Something that's new code is going to be entirely new code. But I will say it has been an issue of confusion over the last several weeks as we are starting to talk with projects about their status and as we're working through where things lie. So, but the answer is it's entirely old code, entirely new code.
Okay.
And so I guess to just clarify...
Michael's point is that it gets muddied, though, when people are actually talking.
Like the Verve project is just one example. They applied for special use permits and rezoning that under the old code were clearly no justification for them. That's why the staff recommendation wasn't to approve, but they pointed to, but your future land use map says X. That's our justification for pursuing it, and I'm worried we get into that situation again, where it's just not so clear.
So, is it okay if I go next?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was not part of this vote last year, but I was sitting right there when it happened, and I wasn't aware of what specific projects were coming down the pipeline, or how many there were, or what the effect was, but I thought it was very strange that it was retroactive, and it was a 3-2 vote, and if I had been up here that day, it would have been a 3-2 vote in the other direction. It would have been something closer to the November or the December options, simply because I think it is strange, purely based on principle, not on whatever projects are out there, because I still don't know what all of them are, that there would be something applied retroactively. Throughout the course of the year, I was paying as close attention as anyone to what was going on up here, and when I was first running for council in the primary back in April, everyone was like, oh, this is going to be done by July. When July rolled around, then it was like, oh, it's going to be done by the next one. And then it got to the point where I was like, am I going to have to vote on this?
Right.
So there were constant shifting dates throughout the whole time. As in any job we've ever had, I'm sure you don't wait around to not do your job while you're waiting for something else.
Yeah.
So I found it odd from a viewer's perspective that it was a retroactive vote regardless of what projects were out there.
Yeah. And the numbers they put together were like $800,000 in, fees. I don't know. I can understand when some people might say, well, that's just the risk they took, but that's a lot of money. We rely on the developer community. We rely on the developer community to help us get the housing stock that we need. This whole new zoning ordinance is built with the idea of making that relationship work better. The thing I'm as much concerned about is the lost time that people will have to go back and, go through, the sunk cost. And then I guess the total that we're seeing on the letter we got was like 1,000 units. Somehow the other day I had this 100,000. I said something stupid, but anyway.
I wouldn't say that. It was just bigger.
Yeah, it was stupid. But 1,000 units, and I get Michael's point that we're not going to get as much goodie, so to speak, in terms of how much affordable housing, or both in the fund or actual units, but these are real units right now that we're saying, okay, either these projects are going to be canceled, and I think some of these will be canceled. I don't think people are bluffing. These are big numbers that can put firms under. So from a selfish perspective, for the city, I think we should take if they say they're going to do something, I believe them. So I'm going to vote.
Here's my basic problem with the letter from Cadre, that the per unit cost that they're talking about, because of the approximate application expenses to date, presumably, let's assume they're all flushed down the toilet, that there is no value to them whatsoever. Aside from one project, we're talking about $300 a unit. That is not a deal breaker kind of number. And if it is, then they're working on a smaller margin than they ought to be working on. My question is there anything about these projects that is a dimensional constraint where they have to redesign the project in order to make it work?
I can't say that I've looked at every single project in detail. Our task has been to stay at the policy level and not look at the details of the specific projects. I did spend some time on the details of the specific projects. I mean, I have one of those projects is in its physical design more compliant with the new ordinance than with the old. I can't permit it under the old ordinance in a pathway that I can see today, but that's.
I mean, my understanding of our new ordinance is that it is much more developer-friendly than the old.
Right.
I think that
Except for the affordable housing component.
I think that is a point, whether or not it's dimensionally going to have to change, but I don't think it's the most, I think it goes back to the principle. I don't think that's the most relevant point or necessary point to consider. Is it something that was in good faith, working under the circumstances of the time, and then it goes retroactively, and whatever it does to the actual projects. To be completely honest, I haven't actually gotten a chance to read the Cadre letter. This is strictly just the principle of the matter of it being a retroactive application on something that goes against that steps on the people's work that they've already been
And to
working
be
on.
clear, nothing was retroactive because none of these projects had any vested rights under any definition of state law.
I mean retroactive
Right,
in the sense
sure,
that
but-
people are continuing to work under assumed.
No one's disagreeing about the legal
principles.
piece.
Yeah.
It's just like, is it fair?
So, I voted in December, for, I guess, against the 31st date, is because I just, not really knowing anything about the project, I was like, okay, we're in improvement today, it's going to go into effect today or tomorrow. That was my just to kind of have that clear cutoff. And I know August 31st is a clear cutoff as well, but that was kind of my mentality at the time. It's like, okay, this is a new day, as far as development here. So I'm leaning towards, at this point, supporting December 18th.
Could you tell us a little more about the impact this will have on staff? That's the only thing that concerns me
So-
in terms of your workload and having to redo stuff.
Look,
And
I'm going to just say at this point in time, it's such a small number of projects, I can't claim that there's going to be a huge impact on staff. It's a very small number of projects that are actually going to get through from that list as I've seen it, and now that I've had an opportunity to look more specifically at the projects.
are you thinking some of them are just not ready for the light of day anyway, and you're going to take a look?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that is the issue, yeah. Some of them the change in the date will allow them to move forward. Some of them doesn't change their situation.
Okay.
And I'll just say also, in the course of fairness, and I hope I'm wrong, but if we have projects come to us, if we change the effective date, and they're coming for a special use permit or a rezoning that is not permitted under that old existing zoning, and they say, but your future land use map says this, and they're not following the affordable housing rules, what is our position going to be? And is it going to be fair for us to say that the interest, because if it is 1,000 units, that's 100 units of affordable housing, 100 families that could have been served with housing, are we going to say, it's fine that you were left on the cutting room floor of the political decision? Because studios renting for $2,000 a month is needed, it's part of the housing market, but it is not the people who make our city work in Parks and Rec, drive our buses, people making $12 an hour. And will it be fair if we make the decision that, your interest was negotiable? I don't think it is. That's why I think this will be a mistake, but I hope I'm wrong that we don't end up in that decision and make that compromise.
I would add that we also, if in fact we're looking at even something close to what the affordable housing fees in lieu were going to be, we're talking about $30 million.
Yeah.
And I thought it was frankly an embarrassment to this council that we wound up having to be involved in trying to decide how much we were willing to shortchange the Affordable Housing Fund in order to get housing that was, being proposed in the Verve and the 2117 Ivy Road project. I thought it was a terrible place for us to be. It was a terrible decision for us, and I just thought that we would be much better off to not put ourselves in that position again. And here we're on.
And I agree, it's a complete mess, and $30 million is, even $10, $20 million is the difference between a homeless shelter getting built or all phases of public housing redevelopment getting built or not. It's a very, very substantial amount of money, and if it's all built on site, 100 is 100 families.
But they're saying that all this just wouldn't even happen, Michael, so
It's not that we're getting that taken away from us. It's maybe we're not getting it on some kind of future potential amount. We're still getting housing, and what we desperately need is housing of all types. After these projects finish, everything moving forward is going to be under the new plan, and we get all of those things. It doesn't take anything away from the future opportunities to allow these to go forward.
It does, if like the Verve and Ivy project, there are developers who are smart and negotiate and said they can only do $5 million across both projects, and then by the end of it, they easily get to 10. If any of that is going on with applications that were submitted in November, then we will.
But to be clear, there's 5 projects here, James?
Yes.
That's what's listed in Cadre's letter. I don't know what.
Well, I want to be clear.
Yes, 5 projects.
Okay, so we're not talking
There's no
about.
surprise projects that would come up.
No. So there's 5 projects that are listed on this list that are water. Okay. I appreciate y'all's points, and I respect, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that this was a mistake.
I thought it was good to have the discussion, so if it's further discussion, if I can get a motion to,
So the motion would be to change the effective date, not the effective date, the vesting date.
Yes.
From August the 31st to the date we voted on the zoning ordinance, which was December the 18th. Okay, I would move that.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Would council consider a motion to rescind prior resolution and reenact the resolution with a different date? You have enacted that resolution, so you should.
I would move that we rescind the resolution that we made on the night of December 18th that set a vesting date of August 31st and reordain or reenact the vesting date of the date at which we approved the legislation, which was December 18th.
Can I get a second on that, please?
Second.
Further discussion among council?
It seems clear the way this vote will go. I will just say to the community who's watching, this is an intricate conversation, but I hope everyone watches closely, and I hope I'm wrong. But developers now have an opportunity to avoid tens of millions of dollars in affordable housing contributions. I hope I'm wrong and they won't do it, but that opportunity now exists, so I hope the whole community watches that closely over the coming months.
These 5 developers.
Correct.
Yes.
Have the opportunity to continue with the projects that they had been previously working on.
Those of them that qualify to do so.
Correct. Under
Any-
the previous law, and all projects moving forward will be under the law that was enacted December 18th. That will be,
Become effective February 19th. Again, as I noted, one of the 5 projects is going to get their site plan approval before February 19th rolls around, so they will be vested without this action. And so, yeah.
Further discussion? If not, can we vote? Motion passes 3-2. Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is other business matters. Councilors, do you have any questions for the city manager to follow up with?
I think we've given the city manager plenty to think about tonight.
Yeah. Okay, it's now the second opportunity for community matters. Is anyone from the public would like to come in, speak? If not, with no further business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.